Well, good afternoon and welcome to the public portion of our regular board meeting of February 23rd. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Blackfoot people. Let's begin our afternoon approving the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve our agenda, please? Tyler, thank you. Call the question, all in favor? So moved. Approval of the minutes. Were there any errors or omissions that anybody noticed? Thank you, Donna. Moves to approve. Call the question, all in favor? So moved. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we will move straight ahead to our presentations. The first presentation, we have Anne Muldoon at the helm waiting for us on Teams to talk to us about inclusive education. Anne, welcome.
Thank you, Christine. I just need to share my screen here so you can see my presentation. You can see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to share the changes we've navigated in inclusive education over the past year. Since the release of the 2020 budget almost a year ago, I'm just going to move slides here. Inclusive education has had to respond to a number of major changes in funding and service delivery that have significantly impacted the work we do supporting children and students. During today's presentation, I will give you an overview of these funding changes and the dismantling of regional collaborative service delivery and the ways in which the division has responded. Then, of course, in March of 2020, we had the added complication of class cancellations due to COVID-19 and the continuing impact of the pandemic into the 2020-2021 school year adds another dimension to supporting student learning in creative ways. And I'll speak to that briefly at the end. So the major change in funding has been the introduction of what's called the Specialised Learning Support Grant. And that really replaces the previous inclusive ed funding model. And it's really intended to provide continuous supports and services to students in an inclusive learning environment. The grant covers three main areas. Two of them fall under ME, which is multidisciplinary supports and meeting diverse needs of the classroom. And the other part of it is student wellness, which Maura takes care of, and I won't address that today. The main difference this year with this new funding model is that now included under multidisciplinary supports are the full range of professionals, the staffing professionals who support with assessment and programming to remove barriers to learning. So really the funding then for services like occupational therapy, speech language pathology, physiotherapy, audiology, and specialist teachers, such as the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing and blind and visually impaired, now fall under the inclusive education budget. The second piece is very similar to the funding we've had in the past. It's for meeting diverse needs in the classroom, and that's really funding that covers like staffing, say for example, learning support teachers, educational assistants, speech language assistants, ESL teachers, student support workers, and our psychologists who we've had hired in division before this. So these are really the typical supports that we provide under inclusive education. It also covers things like resources such as, especially for our complex students, communication devices, mobile lifts, physio beds, FM systems. And of course, it also covers professional learning and capacity building, especially say, for example, our learning support teachers, so that they can in turn build capacity to support within the classroom. So what's the impact of funding changes for inclusive education? Well, last month, Isabel presented to the board on changes to program unit funding. Those changes impact inclusive ed budgeting and programming because children in kindergarten are no longer eligible for program unit funding and now fall under the Specialised Learning Support Grant. So inclusive education, which had previously covered supports in grades 1 to 12, now covers kindergarten. The second major change for inclusive education budgeting is that under the SLS grant, we now have to provide all of the therapy and low incidence supports and services that were up until this school year funded separately under Regional Collaborative Service Delivery, and prior to that, the Student Health Partnership. So the inclusion of all kindergarten children under the SLS grant, and therefore inclusive education, has particular implications for staffing. So in previous years, when children with complex needs in kindergarten were eligible for PUF, that funding was specific to each child and covered all their needs, including support in the classroom. In 2021, this EA support has to be covered out of inclusive education funding. So we've had to increase our team EA allocations for grades 1 to 12 to include kindergarten, or create new positions specific to kindergarten needs. So the three bullets there kind of explain that. This is the first one is the increase in team EA allocations to cover kindergarten. We've had to create a position in kindergarten to really address those severe speech language delays, which didn't go away when PUF disappeared. And also we had to add extra speech language assistance support for the number of kids who are now moderate instead of severe because change in assessment and eligibility requirements. The second major impact of the February 2020 budget on inclusive education was the dismantling of regional collaborative service delivery and the corresponding shift in funding to school authorities to provide all services in schools. From 2014 to 2020, Rcsd, or Regional Collaborative Service Delivery, covered all therapy and low incidence services, and Rcsd was funded separately and was a provincial multi-ministry partnership. Under Rcsd, because at that time Alberta Health Services mandate also included school-aged children, in the Southwest, we benefited from additional top-up of those therapy services in schools through Children's Allied Health, because schools were and are a natural hub for service delivery, especially since parents couldn't always easily access service at the clinic. So really, with this chart shows you with Rcsd funding and with Children's Allied Health top-up, these are the services that we accessed as a division, which were funded separately. They didn't come out of the inclusive education budget. So this graph shows the services accessed, the amount of service we received as a division, and the value to the division. So the main areas were low incidence and rehabilitation or therapy services. And so when you take the whole low incidence team, our division actually represented 35% of the regional caseload because they worked across 6 local school divisions and at a value to us of about $186,000. In terms of therapy supports, this shows you how many therapists we actually accessed in terms of FTE, and this is the cost for each occupational therapy, physical and speech language pathology. So the total value to the division of those supports was $1.2 million. But that wasn't all the supports that we received through Rcsd. We also had mental health therapist consultation. We had systems navigation for families in cases of families with students with complex needs. And that system navigation helped families get the funding and supports they needed in the community. We had ADHD groups for parents, and we had funding for school division initiatives to support students. So last year, that was worth almost $300,000 to us. We put in a proposal for FSLC support in middle and high schools. And the last thing, we did a lot of regional professional learning for schools, parents, and community partners. So with these additional supports, their value came to about roughly $450,000 a year. So if you look at the total Rcsd supports and services with the CAH top-up, we were actually accessing services to a value of $1.6 million. And that's now all being rolled into our inclusive education budget under the SLS grant. So when funding was moved from regional collaborative service delivery to school authorities, AHS changed their mandate in terms of services they would provide to school-aged children and to 3 to 5 year olds in a publicly funded program such as an early education program. So as you can see, these were all services that were removed from schools, and if you look at the disciplines over on the right-hand side, it's clear that we needed to develop a plan for SLP, OT, and PT support in our schools. So local school divisions who were involved in regional collaborative service delivery decided that we needed to retain our regional partnership to provide at least some of these services. It made sense to share supports when maybe based on student need and availability of specialists. So our division made the decision that we would need to continue to access low incidence supports because those are very specialized supports and we would not be able to access those specialists easily. And we didn't really have a need for full-time specialist support in any of those areas. We also decided we would access physiotherapy through the combined group, which is now called Southwest Collaborative Support Services. Basically because of a lack of pediatric physiotherapists, it would be difficult to hire one. And some physiotherapist services were still provided by AHS, so we didn't even need the speed, we needed a full-time position. We also still access complex case. There's no cost to that, but it's of value to us to still be a part of that because it brings us valuable collaboration across ministries and we get some medical consultation with Dr. Edwards. So this here looks very different in terms of the services that we are now contracting through Southwest Collaborative Support Services rather than accessing through Rcsd. We are still maintaining some low incidence supports, and that's the cost of that to the division because we now pay for that is 105,000, almost 106,000. We are currently only able to access 0.2 of physiotherapist at a cost of 25,000, and then we pay for coordination of services. So we are currently contracting $146,000 worth of service. And we have asked for more physiotherapist service, and Southwest Collaborative Support Services does have a current posting for an additional physiotherapist because other divisions need that too. So the 2020 budget clearly presented significant challenges for inclusive education, but we also saw an opportunity to create a division model of service delivery that could better serve our children and students. So in creating a model, we first established priorities based on what we believed to be best for children and students. And one of the things that we really wanted was seamless delivery of OT and SLP supports all the way from early education to grade 3, because the previous approach really was quite fragmented. We had PUF therapists in even kindergarten, and then we moved to children's allied health therapists. And we saw this as an opportunity for schools to have that nice seamless delivery all the way through. And so to do that, we ended up, we decided we had enough demand in our division to hire one occupational therapist. And we initially hired 5 speech language pathologists to do the work of PUF and the work in inclusive education. But it was very clear by December that that wasn't sufficient because of huge caseloads, so we added an additional SLP on a temporary basis in December. And we also wanted to ensure we had supports for kids with complex needs beyond grade 3. We sometimes didn't have much support in children's allied health in middle and high school. We also really wanted the work to be done in the classroom where we could see transfer of skills rather than the traditional pull-out model. And we also saw the opportunity to align our therapy services with our Rti Framework, so all students would benefit from strategies and supports in the classroom, and I'll address that on a future slide. And we also saw an opportunity for really, with having an in-house team, a really good opportunity to collaborate more on meeting student needs in a cohesive manner. So if we think about inclusion as removing barriers that limit the presence, participation and achievement of learners, then we can see how therapists can contribute to that process in the classroom, because they can help remove, say, for example, expressive receptive language barriers, sensory barriers, mobility barriers, and so on, so that all students can access learning. So this is you've seen this before, this is our division Rti framework that we've developed over the last few years. And we really wanted to see our therapies, when we thought about what our therapy services could look like in practice, we really wanted it to align with this. So the framework we use for addressing academic and instructional barriers is response to instruction and intervention. And it works for all supports, including therapy supports. RTI involves universal supports for all students during core instruction, early identification of student struggles through benchmark and formative assessment, early intervention through supplemental and individualized instruction and supports, and frequent progress monitoring. As we continue to develop the new division model for therapy supports, we are building on this framework with our focus on work in the classroom. So the approach of the therapist in the classroom is really no different from that of teachers or division psychologists, as described by these bullets here. If you take, for example, the work of an occupational therapist, teacher may ask an OT to help support the student struggling with self-regulation in the classroom, and the OT will be involved in assessment and or classroom observation to determine the root cause of the student difficulty. They will help identify the barriers in the learning environment. So say, for example, they feel that maybe students' sensory issues, they will look at maybe how the lighting and noise levels may affect a student. And then they will suggest supports for that student, building on students' observed strengths and what might work for them. And then they'll look back to evaluate the effectiveness of the supports. These slides I'm not going to go into. I just wanted to just include them just to show you, because although we're using this right now, we're still developing the model. So these are very basic slides right now, but you will have the PowerPoint if you want to look at them in more detail. But we have been working with our speech language pathologists, for example, on how can they support this teacher on core instruction in the classroom, with targeted instruction in the classroom, and then with more intensive instruction for individual students. And so we've linked a lot of the work that the SLPs do with a lot of the language and literacy work within the classroom. So we're having our own therapist provides an opportunity for a multidisciplinary approach to student support. And we've really been encouraging this year collaboration with the wider division team. For example, if a psychologist is dealing with a behavior issue in the classroom and suspects sensory issues, they will consult with our new occupational therapist. Our therapists are also doing concurrent visits to schools, which schools really appreciate, I think, because it actually minimizes the amount of time that they have to spend talking to teachers. They can speak to two therapists at once. And with therapists based at division office, we as division leaders are finding that we're much better informed about referrals, support needs, assessment information, and transition requirements. And we really are trying to promote that RTI approach, so we have consistency of approach across all schools. And we also are finding that the continuity of expertise on school learning teams from year to year is very valuable, with the same therapist at a school year after year. From East to grade 3 and beyond, they become very familiar with student needs, and they also are a consistent presence on that school's learning team. So, moving on to the impact of COVID on students with exceptional needs. When we moved to at-home learning in March 2020, our real concern was for our students with exceptional needs who needed a whole team supporting them, really, and supporting their program and their instructional support plan. So our first piece that we were really keen to figure out was how could we have our teachers collaborate together to work to support these students with really complex needs. So this is an example of, in our elementary skills programs, Nikki's Den and Parker's Place, how they worked together and they created a microsite. shared between the two programs for our division elementary students with exceptional needs. And this is a closer look up. This is an example of the quality of the online provision for our most complex students. This is Mrs. Hamilton, Colleen Hamilton. She's a teacher in Parker's Place at Park Meadows. It's a division program. And so it shows you how teachers produced video lessons and they posted them online. They set parents up to support their students at home. They provided visuals, first then charts, daily schedules. They sent home lesson materials in advance. And we as a department, Inclusive Ed, we provided Inclusive Ed iPads if needed for students to use at home. And we sent home any division equipment that students needed to continue their learning at home, say, for example, FM systems. One of the things that we were just so impressed with our teachers working with students with complex needs is how to maintain best practice even in an online environment, with modeling and gradual release of responsibility, pre-teaching vocabulary, matching vocabulary words to actions. And I put a link in here for you to watch some of Colleen's work if you choose to do so. One of the big challenges in the spring was that many of those students had really complex needs. Their programming was typically supported by a very large team of experts. And one of the problems we had in the spring was that therapy services for our most complex kids were very difficult to access with Children's Allied Health because a lot of their staff were redeployed to support the response to the pandemic. And so they weren't available to work in our schools. Another way that we kind of worked is we worked with our schools to create collaborative groups in Microsoft Teams. So this is an example of our limited supporting English language learners, our limited formal schooling and transition teachers did an awesome job just sharing lesson ideas and resources. And we also had a lot of support from division staff. So Bev Smith, our ESL lead teacher, she would go in and add resources in there, and she also helped me with some work, just kind of encouraging that real purposeful talk, because our English language learners suffered badly with online learning, with not having that access to that rich language piece in the classroom. So we really tried to encourage opportunities for purposeful talk online. We also ensured that all the families had at least one device, and we gave out division iPads so they could have one device in the home. September brought new challenges, with some learners returning to the classroom and others staying at home. So we had to come up with a way where our most complex learners could continue to access that specialist teaching piece at home. And so we decided that if we maintained the level of EA supports in our specialized learning support classrooms, that we could have the teachers actually meet the needs of both at home and in-school learners. And the teachers agreed to that. So in Midland High School and Parker's Place in Nicky's Den, that's what happens. And we did see a gap with students who had pretty complex needs but were in inclusive classrooms. So with federal funds, we were able to hire a teacher to support at-home learners with complex needs who had previously attended inclusive classrooms in various elementary schools. And this year, with our own therapists, we can continue to support at-home learners either through direct service online or in consultation with teachers. And finally, we really just kept promoting with our learning support teachers those supports that are good for students in the classroom need to be sustained while students are accessing learning from home. So we continue to promote all of those. It may have looked slightly different online, because small group work now looks like small group work in breakout rooms and teams, but it still needs to happen for those students who need that targeted support. And we have been able to meet the needs of most kids. I mean, there are always challenges, but I think we have done a pretty good job at meeting those needs. We did come across a really good resource, Paula Klutz's All In 18 Ways to Create Inclusive Virtual Classrooms, which we shared with all learning support teachers to help with some of the really good strategies to support kids at home. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I will close the presentation, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them.
Thank you so much, Anne. Does anybody have any questions or feedback for Anne? And thank you for all the work that you do to support our learners. And I know you have a big portfolio, and your work in the lives of these students is essential. I really appreciated just seeing the work that you have done with your department to ensure that even with the shift in funding, these students have seamless care and seamless support. And I know, like you say, it's not 100% perfect, but you strive for the best for our students. So thank you for supporting them and their families as well. I know, especially in this COVID season, it adds several layers of complexity, especially to our at-home learners that you're working with. So thank you for all that you're doing and for supporting them.
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate that. Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Okay, now we will move on to our Edwin Parr nomination. Mike.
Well, thank you, Christine. It looks like our Edwin Parr nominee is here. What's going to happen is Michaela McNabb is our Edwin Parr nominee, and she'll just have a minute to introduce herself and share a few words. And then her principal, Chris Harris, is going to talk about some of the attributes that make her such a great candidate for this. So, Michaela and Chris, we can see you on the screen, and welcome, and we're very excited to have you here. And Michaela, I'm just going to turn it over to you for a minute, and you can introduce yourself to the board, and welcome.
Awesome, thank you so much. Hi everybody, I'm Michaela McNabb and I'm a first year teacher at General Stewart School. I'm teaching kindergarten and I'm also the learning support teacher here. And I would just like to thank all of you for being here today, and I'm so humbled and honored to be nominated for this award and to have graduated last year in April. I know a lot of first year teachers and I know how dedicated they are. And for me to be nominated for Lethbridge School Division is just so humbling, and I am really proud to be an educator. Just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Calgary, and a funny story of how I ended up in Lethbridge is Chris called me 7 days before the first day of school, offering me the job here, and I just knew in my heart that that was what I needed to do. So I packed up my life in Calgary, moved to Lethbridge, found a place to live, overhauled my classroom, and got my head wrapped around how to teach kindergarten and learning support, and that's the best decision I ever made, and I'm so proud to be here in Lethbridge and so proud to be at General Stewart. And I'll just share a couple of my favorite things about teaching here. And so the first thing for sure would be building relationships with students. That's no question. I have the most loving, kind, amazing students, and they make me laugh and smile, and that is just what teaching is all about, is loving everyone. And yeah, it's been amazing. And another exciting part is just watching students grow. In practicum, you never really have the opportunity to see that long amount of growth, and these past 6 months I've seen cognitive growth, social growth, emotional growth, physical growth. Today we had one of our students flex her muscles, and I'm like, yep, we are growing every day, which is so lovely to see. And of course, there's a lot of challenges with COVID-19, and I've really enjoyed experimenting all the ways that I can be creative and create those unique learning experiences with, you know, the guidelines that we have to follow. And I've received a lot of really good feedback from parents letting me know that their child comes home just wanting to come back to school and raving about how they got to paint their feet today and they got to use shaving cream, and those kinds of things just let me know that I have created a learning environment that is responsive to student voice and it's inclusive to all needs and is very engaging to all minds, which is awesome. And lastly, I'm just gonna touch on my experience as a learning support teacher. And actually in high school, I was a student who spent 1 block a day in the learning support room. And I got really, really close with my learning support teacher. And I actually found out this year that when I got to know her, that was her first year as a learning support teacher, which is cool. It's kind of full circle, and her and I are still in contact today. And the reason why she's so memorable is that she really believed in me and supported me. And now with my role, I'm realizing that I can be that person to other students, which is really special to me. And I believe that every student should feel capable and should feel successful. So as the learning support teacher at General Stewart, I'm fortunate that I have that opportunity to be that person. So although this year has been crazy and full of disastrous events, I have to say that just reflecting on these last 6 months, they have honestly been some of the most fulfilling, happiest months of my life. And so I'd like to thank the Lethbridge school community, and especially Chris and the General Stewart family, just for providing this opportunity. And yeah, thank you all for being here. It's truly an honor.
Thank you, Michaela. We'll turn it over to Chris now.
All right, well, thank you. And I think based on what you just heard from Michaela, you can definitely see why she is such a worthy nominee for this award, because as she mentioned, it was a very, very quick turnaround from when I interviewed her to when we were able to bring her on board. One thing that came just blindingly clear through the interview and her reference checks, what an absolute powerful teacher she was in making connections with kids. Every one of the people that I had spoken to, part-time advisors, teachers that she had worked with, they all very clearly illustrated that she knew how to connect with kids, and it wasn't something that she had to go out of her way to do. It was just a natural part of her personality. And it's absolutely shone through here. So from coming into a classroom that was in a very short time, needing to turn it around to make it into her own classroom, she was able to do that. She got down here as quick as she was able to. It took a lot of work, and it wasn't the sort of thing that was done for the first day. That classroom had a number of things that were in there that we needed to make some adjustments with, and Michaela has just done a tremendous job in making that into an absolutely engaging learning environment. The biggest thing that she has done each day, meeting with the students and the parents when they're first being dropped off, meeting with them when they're being picked up, just establishing those connections. Our very first day on August 31st, when we had our staff back here the day before school started, we had a meet and greet where it was her first opportunity to kind of meet some of the parents that were going to be coming in. And she had just got to Lethbridge that day. So, she could have very easily been frazzled and, a little bit nervous in doing it, but she handled it like a vet. She was able to just very clearly speak to all of the parents, outline, what some goals and things that she wanted to achieve with them throughout the year, and just had such a positive energy that it was just so infectious, and the parents just came away just completely enthused. I had parents that I spoke to, in the few days afterwards, because they were nervous because we had a kindergarten teacher that had been here for quite a while, and so they were nervous about a new kindergarten teacher coming in. After talking to her, they were absolutely convinced that she was going to do a great job, and she's 100% lived up to that. A few things that she's done in the classroom, just as she mentioned, and as you all know, there's many different guidelines that we have to follow. So when we do things like interviews where we're not bringing parents in, it's difficult to really show off a lot of the things that students are working on. So Michaela and a number of other teachers at our school, but Michaela started doing this with kindergarten students, which is really cool. It's a program called My Blueprint, and it's an opportunity for them to show off their own digital portfolio of just different work that they have done, different projects that they've worked on, things that they've done, and just showing that off. So it's a way to keep the students proud and showing off what they're doing, but allowing the parents to see what they're doing too, and give them a window into the classroom as well. We also did a video when we got some new taps and faucets in the school here, and so Michaela became a professional hand model, although she hasn't actually been paid for it yet, but she became the hand model and just willing to get involved in any activity that we were doing for this activity. So it just shows that she's so willing to participate in anything for the school, to help out the students, to help out the school in any way that she can. And so but by providing these learning opportunities, rich learning, creative opportunities in her classroom, her students are just, as much as they are loving and caring, it's a reflection of what she does and how she treats them, because they are definitely modeling what she chose them. And it's just been fantastic to see. On top of that, that's half of her job that she does for point 5. The remainder of her job is learning support. And as you just listened to Anne talking about, that's a great deal for a veteran teacher to learn and to figure out and put all those things into place. And Michaela has been an absolute rock star in doing that this year. How she's been able to come in and learn all of the different things that she needed to do for procedures, for assessments, learning what she needed to do, taking her Wyatt assessment test for a course so that she'd be able to administer those tests, and just really making connections with those students, whether they're in our school or whether they're online. She still continues to work with our online students and work with them, finding creative ways to engage and help them out wherever they need it. So it's just been absolutely fantastic having her here. We are incredibly lucky that she was able to come down and join us here, and we're just incredibly happy and pleased with the work that she's doing. So I think she's a very, very deserving nominee. So I'm very proud of her, and I think she's doing great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris and Michaela, for your time here today and sharing your story with us. And certainly, Michaela, teaching kindergarten with that short notice is certainly a challenging task, and making sure that parents feel like the kids are going to be safe and welcome. Obviously, you did that exceptionally well. And as Chris mentioned, being a learning support teacher in your first year is just phenomenal. So we're grateful for the work you've done, and I know the school community is grateful, and we're really happy to get to learn a little more about your story today. Very proud to hear our nominee. So, Christine, anything else you want to add?
Thank you. Well, Michaela, I loved reading about you, and it was great to meet you via screen today. And your love for your students and your love for teaching is evident. It just exudes in the way you talk about your kids and the things that you've been able to experience and grow in. And so I just want to thank you for choosing Lethbridge School Division, for driving 2 hours south and choosing to live in our great city. And I just want to thank you for serving your students well and your families well. And I just want to say on behalf of the board, it's an honor to have you as our Edmund Parr nominee. And we hope you have a fantastic rest of the year with your kiddos in kindergarten.
Thank you so much. That is such kind words.
Thank you for joining us today. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to our policy review. Trish Stein is unable to join us today, so Cheryl will be taking over our policy for Trish.
Okay, the first policy this afternoon is one that came before the board before, and there was language that was in that policy in number 6, specifically where we had is guilty of improper conduct. Thought that perhaps that was a little bit of strong language, and so the new sentence that's been put in there is the chair of the board may cause to be excluded from a meeting any person who, in the opinion of the chair, refuses to refrain from improper conduct, and that should not shoot the up at the meeting. Does that address sort of the concern with the guilty piece did come from the school act, but it doesn't mean that that has to be exactly the same. I think that as long as the spirit of the chair having that authority is in there, and guilty is a strong word, and wondering if that meets. Is there any? All right. Any thoughts? Good.
Can we have someone move forward the motion for this policy?
I move to approve policy number 204.2, regular board meetings.
As amended.
I'm sorry, as amended.
That's okay, Lola, thank you. Any further discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Passed. Now let's move on to the next.
Employee code of conduct, updating the policy because the last update was in 2011. This is a fairly straightforward policy, and the changes in this involve primarily moving from evaluation of a family member. So that there was the committee decided they needed some clarification there. Otherwise, the only changes has been division until we get to the second page. So I'll pause at the first page if there's any questions about changes to this point. On the second page, we were just simply using division, material equipment added personnel, and or facilities for purposes not directly related to the individual's work-related duties and responsibility or for personal gain. So in other words, having someone perhaps that you supervise or someone in the division do work for you personally that you would have to gain from would be an example by personnel was added. Selecting a family member or common law partner as a substitute when an employee requires replacement unless approved by the superintendent or designate. I mean, the reality is there has certainly been situations where that's been a piece of reality where that's been the substitute that's available, and certainly if it's approved by the designate, of course, it's the associate superintendent of human resources who on the rare occasion this happens, it goes through associate superintendent of human resources and everyone's aware of it and it's transparent and makes good sense. And number 3, should an employee become aware of violation of this policy, they should advise their supervisor or associate superintendent of human resources. We needed to put sort of a so what in there. So if someone does become aware of it, what action are they supposed to take? And then individuals contributing this policy may be subject to discipline. So an example would be the substitute teacher piece or other kinds of things. And certainly discipline is always on a continuum of severity of the act. So we changed it from shall to may. And then updated the references. Any questions?
We have a motion for this policy.
I make a motion, policy number 400.21.1, employee conflict of interest, passed as amended, right?
Thank you, Lola. Any further discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Passed. Thank you.
The next policy is staff hiring. On the first page, it was a matter of updating from School to Education Act and the 4.2. The role of human resources in the selection process is that of facilitator, coordinator, and advisor. Really regarding personnel policies, the board didn't make that's why that was in there in terms of narrowing up role. The most significant changes to this policy came on page 2 under 6 and 7. So the policy had upon employment with the district that had teachers will be placed on a contract in accordance with the Education Act. Really, teachers aren't the only individuals that we hire. And so what we did is the committee decided that really it's the individual will be placed on a contract in accordance with the Education Act, appropriate collective agreement, and or applicable legislation. And this applies across all employee groups. So the 6.1 and 6.2, really that falls under the teacher evaluation policy. It doesn't need to be in this policy, and it only applies to teachers, and so wasn't applicable whatsoever to the other employee groups. What number 7 is applicable, all staff shall complete a satisfactory probationary employment period before permanent employment is considered. Any exception shall be approved by the superintendent. So all employee groups do have in their, well, in policy, if you look under evaluation policies, do have a probationary period. So it had before, the principal would be the one determining the staffing plan for the school and how the teaching and support staff will be deployed based on student needs, program needs, and district initiatives. We know that certainly schools and principals are given parameters to work within. So the committee decided that it would look like, recommended looking like the Associate Superintendent of Human Resources or designate. So it may be the Rhonda, for example, who oversees support staff. Shall work with school administration and division managers to determine the most effective deployment of staff within the parameters of programming and budget. So that wording seemed to make more sense in terms of what actually happens in reality. And which moves down to number 10, district division, superintendent or designate approves application of external funding for this purpose. What this is saying is that staff shall be paid only out of designated division funds unless the superintendent or designate approves. So an example would be our Making Connections program funding, where it's it can be a designate sometimes other than the superintendent who reviews, oversees, and signs those agreements or makes those decisions. Private funding of staffing costs shall not be allowed, that stays the same. And the casual substitute employees stay the same. And the references have been updated. Any questions or thoughts? No? Can we have a motion to pass this policy, please?
I move to approve the selection or the division, the selection and appointment of division administrators shall be in accordance with division policy as amended. I'm sorry, it is 401.1 on staff.
As amended. Thank you, Lola. Any further discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Secondary employment.
Secondary employment. Not a lot of changes. The primary change was basically the tone of the first regulation. I know that one member of the policy committee indicated, that seems pretty demanding or almost punitive in nature, the way it was stated, that as a general, no employee shall engage in secondary employment. The point was made around the committee that many of our employees, especially our support staff, do have secondary employment, and it shouldn't be worded in a way that makes them feel as if they're contravening anything. So it's rather than saying as a general rule, because that's under a statement, it says if an employee engages in secondary employment, including self-employment or business undertaking, shall not affect the employee's roles and responsibilities in any of the following ways. And then all of those impacts or effects remain the same. It certainly makes it far less, well, the tone is more positive. So in other words, recognizing that it shouldn't say as a general rule you don't, but it says if you do, then the impact shall not be these kinds of things on the school division. So that's really the major change in that, other than updating the references. Tyler?
think at number one, we need an apostrophe that shall not affect the employee's role. Show possession of those roles by the employee.
Oh, yes, okay, thank you.
I'm making, what am I doing? I move to approve policy 40524, secondary employment as amended.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Carried. Last policy.
Last policy, and just a very exciting policy, student records. There's not a lot of leeway or discussion in terms of what the content of the policy of student records is, because it all comes directly out of the school act. So it has been checked to make sure it's current with the current student records regulation. Maura, thank you for doing that. And Justice Sadlowski, what huge change was the regulation, the procedure piece, or the procedure that gets attached to this, thanks to Maura, and that's because of course we now have the digital student record piece, but that didn't account for any changes in this because the Education Act and the Alberta regulation of student records pretty much stays the same. So unless there's any questions.
I move to approve policy 609.5, student record as amended.
Thank you. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Now, next on our agenda is the proposed boundary changes for 2021-2022 school year. One thing, I don't know if we need to do it now. We have the public portion is at 5 o'clock, public forum, and I would like this part of our agenda to be uninterrupted. Do we need a motion to have the public forum pushed back past 5 o'clock? Or does anybody know the procedure for that? Because typically we stop at 5 for public forum. Are we able to, do we need a motion to pass? Push that back? Okay, would somebody be willing to put that motion forward? Donna?
I move that the public forum be after this presentation. And if it's a little later than 5, then it'll have to be after we've done the presentation on the policies.
Thank you, Donna. Call the question, all in favor? Tyler? Rich?
Opposed?
Did you need clarification?
I sure do, yeah.
Okay, so my concern is,
I get your concern on wanting to continue through.
yeah,
My question is, are we taking any public forum from people online? Because
yes.
if so, what if someone is waiting for public forum to speak to this topic? And we discuss the topic, do the topic, do what we're doing, and then they don't get a chance to speak until the end, until it's all said and done. So that's my concern.
The way public forum is set up now, they have to have submitted a letter or a video prior to our meeting. So everything that we have for public forum, we already have ready to go.
So there is no one who would be.
There is no one that would be missed that's waiting live. So even public forum that is going to be pertaining to the boundary, we'll move into our boundary discussion. Those public forum pieces that aren't pertaining to the boundaries we will then hear following the boundary discussion.
Okay, perfect.
Nobody will be lost. All right, well, we will begin with a presentation by Christine Lee about the new boundary proposal.
Hey, thank you very much. Wait for my trustee assistant here to pop up the PowerPoint for me. Thank you, ma'am. Perfect, thank you so much. So this presentation was provided ahead in the board package as well as was posted online for the public on Friday afternoon. And so I'm going to take you through that presentation and talk to some of the points. So we've sort of set this presentation up to talk about the boundary review process, just to review kind of the process we went through, talk about the feedback we received on the proposed boundary changes, and then really at the end of the day, what have we done to try and address some of those comments that we received in the feedback loop. So first of all, the boundary review process. We were on a very lengthy process. It started in December 2018. It started with West Lethbridge, knowing that West Lethbridge was the most complex and the most in need of having the boundaries addressed due to growth capacity concerns. We then added South Lethbridge, and then we added a look at North Lethbridge boundaries. The committees met over the 2 years, came up with some suggested solutions. Those suggested solutions were posted online January 12th for feedback. Feedback was received by January 28th. All that feedback in raw information was presented to the trustees on February 10th for consideration and review and discussion and consideration. Then we made some changes based on the feedback, and we are now presenting what we possibly changed from those reviews today for approval by the board for the boundary changes. Anything approved today by the board will be effective for the 2021-2022 school year. So I just want to comment on the feedback we did receive from the community, which was very well, we very appreciated it. We had some very thorough and thoughtful comments that were received, and a number of concerns. And so it was good to hear everybody's voice who provided the comments. We had over 2,000 views of our boundary review presentation, and over 600 comments on our feedback webpage. We received some personal letters and even a change.org visit petition. And all this information was provided to the trustees for their review. So we looked at the review of the information and considered all the feedback. We looked at the feedback and tried to determine common themes around some of the concerns that were expressed. And then we tried to figure out, of course, what could we do to address some of the concerns. So now we'll talk about, in this process for each sector of the city, we'll talk about, so why did we need to change the boundaries? When we proposed the changes, what did we hear about those proposals? That was the January proposals. And then what is it that we can? So West Lethbridge Elementary, as I explained, West Lethbridge Elementary was the most complex area. We had a significant number of committee meetings with our West Lethbridge Boundary Committee. Our committees for the study of the boundaries consisted of principals from all the schools that were impacted by potential changes and senior administration, facilities, and transportation. So we have a lot of viewpoints and perspectives, which were really important when we were studying the boundaries. So why do we need to change West Lethbridge boundaries? Well, West Lethbridge has had the highest growth rate in the city of Lethbridge of over 10% in the last 5 years. West Lethbridge has four out of 6 areas in Lethbridge that have planned subdivision growth or growth that is already underway. We currently have only one elementary school, which is like Mount First, in the north end of West Lethbridge. And we have 3 elementary schools in the south end of West Lethbridge. You can see we have an imbalance of elementary schools in West Lethbridge. Elementary schools are over capacity in West Lethbridge. We have capacity between 80 to 98%. And in fact, that's in 1920. Actually, in Coalbanks is out over 100% capacity at this point. If we take a look at the modulars that we've been adding over the years, if we took all those modulars off, we'd actually be at 175 to 200% capacity. So why is that important? Because each time we add a modular, yes, it gives us some classroom space, but it does put pressure on our core facilities, like the library, the learning commons, the core gathering spaces, the gyms, the hallways. And so it really does impact the school learning experience. Because of having one elementary school in North End, and we have at least two schools that we would say are absolutely full, which is Proby and Coalbanks, and then we have growing areas, there is a need for a new elementary school in West Lethbridge in Gary Station. This is the #1 capital priority we've had on the school division's capital plan for a number of years. However, I really want to emphasize, even if the province gave us a letter today that says, congratulations, we are granting you money to start planning and building for new West Lethbridge Elementary, it is at least 4 years out from opening, so it would probably not open until September 2025. We have to address the capacity concerns now at elementary school in West Lethbridge. We cannot wait another 4 years, given where we're at now and the potential growth that is there in West Lethbridge with new communities developing, Country Meadows, Gary Station, and the crossings. So given the need, we took a look at the proposed changes and then we heard some comments on those. So some of the proposed changes that we made, when we were looking at West Lethbridge Elementary, we decided there's probably a need to move at a minimum 200 students out of West Lethbridge. So how do we do that? The committee took a look at each community in West Lethbridge to see, is there some communities that would make logical sense to move over to South Lethbridge? And why would we consider South Lethbridge? Because we're now opening a new school in South Lethbridge and we will have some capacity in South Lethbridge. We took a look at some of the communities, but 1 or 2 communities on their own did not have enough students to move over to effect the change that we needed. So as last resort, and I really do want to say it was the last resort of the committee, what made the most sense was moving French Immersion out of Cole, Nicholas Sharon, and moving it over to South Lethbridge out of Cole, Agnes Davidson. We know we needed to create a new boundary with the opening of Dr. Robert Claxton in South Lethbridge. We knew we'd be moving students from the Agnes Davidson area as well as from Lakeview to fill Dr. Robert Claxton, so we knew we had space. This made the most sense. So when we were moving students out of Ecole Nicholas Sharon over to South Lethbridge as part of our consideration, we now needed to alleviate some space at Coalbanks, and we need to alleviate a little bit of space at Dr. Proby. So we took a look at moving the areas that are north of Move Up Drive, Gary Station, Country Meadows, and Piers, moving them to my Fountain Horse to alleviate Coalbanks. We moved Highlands area over into Nicholas Sharon, and we moved a small chunk of space that was designated to Dr. Proby into Nicholas Sharon. There's room in Nicholas Sharon to help alleviate some of the pressure at Dr. Proby. So what did we hear about those changes? Certainly we heard very, very strong opposition and concern to moving the French Immersion program out of Ecole Nicholas Sharon to Cole Agnes Davidson. Some of the concerns, we just moved them a few years ago from the south. And the reason we moved it back then is that Ecole Agnes Davidson was reaching over capacity. Lakeview was over 91% capacity, and we needed to create space in South Lethbridge. We were opening up Coalbanks and we knew we were redoing boundaries. At that time, we had space to break that program. First time we got a new school announced. We also heard that's unfair to West Lethbridge. We also heard concern over long bus rides from West Lethbridge over to Agnes Davidson. And of course, concern over midday pickup and drop off for kindergarten students. We also heard concern that there's movement of the Highlands area over to Nicholas Sharon did not make sense, given that one, Highlands was already with Mike Mountain Horse and there's room at Mike Mountain Horse. And it's within walking distance to the school. It's really part of the community. We heard oppositions, of course, to moving students out of the Coalbanks Elementary boundary to Mike Mountain Horse School. We heard some concerns over students from the Proby boundary being moved to Nicholas Sharon. And we needed to make some space at Proby because Proby is fast and passing. We heard the change will be difficult for students. And we did actually hear a little bit of general support for the change because there was understanding that we needed to do something. So we heard the concerns, and there was quite a bit of concern that was provided. So when we took a look at the feedback, took a look at some of the suggestions, we took a look at what can we do given the information that's been provided us in the feedback. Given that we were having to find over 200 spaces to alleviate pressure in West Lethbridge, not moving students out of West Lethbridge was not an option. It was not an option right from the beginning. And as I explained before, when we looked at various communities, even St. Heritage and Lethbridge, there just wasn't enough students to make that. And so what made the most sense was creating a single track French immersion program that collectively stated and moving their students faster. We know this was difficult. Nicholas Sharon currently has, just for information, 2/3 of the French immersion students are actually in West Lethbridge or bused to Nicholas Sharon for French immersion. We know there's a concern over bus time, and so we will do whatever we can to make sure the routes are short enough coming through West Lethbridge so that there's a more of a direct route as best possible over to Colette. I've just stated so you try to keep the bus ride time as short as possible. We will take a look to see if it's possible to full day kindergarten at Cole Agnes Davidson so that we do not have that midday concern with picking up students. We looked at the Highlands area, and after further examination, it is very close to Mike Mountain Horse. It already was in Mike Mountain Horse, so it didn't make sense to move it. So we put it back. That's number 4 on the map. We know there was concerns of moving crossings / piers, starting to develop for crossings, Country Meadows, and Gary Station out of Coalbanks. We had no choice. Coalbanks is full, and those are growing areas, and so we had to do something. So we had to move them up. Now in the proposal, we're putting the Highlands area back in Mountain Horse and having those 3 growing areas for the Mountain Horse. That school will be overfull within a few years. It is the only school in the north end of West Lethbridge. We cannot have all 3 communities going into Mountain Horse. So we took a look at it. Country Meadows and Gary Station are closer to Mountain Horse, and the crossings area is actually closer to Nicholas Sharon. So in our proposed changes, we propose, since we're removing crossings anyways, we would move them to Nicholas Sharon and we would bus those students to Nicholas Sharon. We've received some comments on that in our in emails, as well as will be in our public forum. And so we will, when we're done the presentation, we'll make sure we review that information that's come. So that information is part of the decision process. And we go forward. Number 6, Proby's beyond capacity. So we really had to make some changes. So we moved the shared area between Nicholas Sharon and Proby to be to Nicholas Sharon. And then we moved a little piece of what was Nicholas Sharon, it was Proby into Nicholas Sharon, just to provide a little bit of relief for that area. And Coalbanks, as we said, is beyond capacity. We had to make that move and move the students on the north end of West Lethbridge. It made more sense. So when we get into middle schools in West Lethbridge, so the question is, why are we changing middle school boundaries when we just opened a school in 2018, Senator Joyce Fairburn? Senator Joyce Fairburn alleviated the growth capacity pressures we have at GSIP. GSIP is overfull, overcrowded, and we needed to make a change. We needed a new school, and a new school alleviated that problem that we had. However, we need to make sure that there's a nice balance in the numbers at each of those schools. Their capacities are very close, and we want to make sure that there's enough students in each school for program viability and that students get great learning opportunities. So that was the need for looking at changing the West Lethbridge middle school boundaries. So what we changed was we divided the Copperwood community along Bullbanks Boulevard and Bullbanks Lane. Perhaps that portion going to GS Lakey, and the rest to Senator Joyce Fairburn. We already dipped into the south side of Lethbridge. You see a little dip there on the other side of Bullbanks. That was already there, and we've extended it through the Bullbanks area in that original proposal. What did we hear? We heard some strong opposition to splitting the Copperwood community between the two middle schools, because there's, of course, families that connect throughout the community. Why would we move just one geographic area rather than split neighborhood? There was concern over walk safety from Copperwood to Lakey. And then there was also the suggestion of extending the Lakey boundary to the Varsity Village area. So what can we do? When we took a look at middle school boundaries, we thought maybe we should try to not split up a neighborhood if possible. And so looking at one of the suggestions we received about extending that boundary, we extended the boundary along Columbia Boulevard to University Drive, connecting that area that's already going to GS Lake. And so that's the change we've made. Certainly with the two middle schools in West Lethbridge, there is the ability to take a look at our choice policy, and Superintendent Gilmore will explain that school choice policy a bit later in the presentation. And West Lethbridge High School. Why do we need to change? So currently, Chinook High School has the boundaries, the whole West Lethbridge. Chinook High School was built in 2010, and as we've explained, West Lethbridge has grown significantly over the years. Chinook High School's current capacity is 86%, and when we get over 85%, we consider a school full because it starts to impact the learning spaces, the core, how students move throughout the hallways and whatnot. And so we look at our enrollment projections, and as we see West Lethbridge growing and how our students are moving through elementary, middle school, and high school, enrollment is projected to be around 1,600 students in under 5 years, and that will put the capacity of Chinook High School at 112%. When people say, why don't you just build another school? Well, we can't just build another school because we have to get approved for that. We have to get funding for that from the province of Alberta. With a high school at 42% capacity, such as LCI, which is just across the river, 15-20 minute drive. I won't say bus ride, drive. There's just no way we can get a school approved for another high school. It's over a $50 million expenditure, and so we would get one approved. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just heard one. How many kids is that?
At LCI, 900. It's a 2,100 student school. That full capacity.
But we haven't had so much capacity here.
No, I think the most we had was 1,500 kids.
Yeah, you did, right?
Before Chinook was actually open.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's why we needed, and we were growing, and that's why we needed Chinook at the time, right? So Lethbridge changes quite a bit in the number of years. So with that happening, we were able to make the case a number of years ago for another high school in West Lethbridge. But because we have the excess capacity, that's just not possible. And so we had really, with growth and capacity pressures, we just had no choice. Again, it's similar to elementary. We have no choice but to move students to South Lethbridge. So we originally cut the boundary with Temple Boulevard in West Lethbridge, with south of Temple going to LCI, everything north going to Chinook High School. We heard concerns, and part of the change was we are certainly moving the students over in stages. So in 2021-22, students that are now in grade 8 moving into grade 9 would be required to move to LCI, and then grades 9, 10, 9, 11, 9, 12, and then full boundary at 2024-25. That was designed so that current students at Chinook High School can stay at Chinook High School and finish grade 12. We heard concerns that the way the boundaries were drawn, that we may be moving too many students from Chinook and may harm current programming. We also heard concerns about siblings of current Chinook High School students having moved to LCI. And so when we took a look at the feedback, we said, okay, what can we do here? So we did take a look at where we redraw the boundary. We moved it further south for Chinook along Cloud Drive. And so that put more students back in the Chinook boundary. It also just makes a better boundary line. It's not jagged and it makes more sense. We then took a look and said, what does it look like if we allow siblings of students attending Chinook High School who reside in the new LCI boundary who want to attend Chinook High School? So we made the change that if you are a sibling of a student in Chinook High School, you will be allowed to attend Chinook High School if you choose, and we will still provide transportation during the transition period. And transition is a little different than school choice, and again, Dr. Kilmer will explain that a little later in the presentation. So we're providing a transition period, but allow transportation to Chinook High School for those students in that new LCI boundary only up to 22, 23, 24. By that time, all the siblings will have moved through. For the 2024-25 school year, students in the LCI boundary in West Lethbridge that are siblings of students currently attending Chinook will no longer receive transportation services, but will remain students of Chinook as identified siblings during the transition period. And then any other students wanting to attend Chinook High School after that will have to follow the school choice policy. And the school choice policy only applies if a school is not considered full at that time. Chinook is considered full at this time. But in 24-25, I would presume it'll still be full, but we might see a different growth pattern in West Lethbridge. So, and we'll have that option down. So moving on to South Lethbridge, you can see West Lethbridge and South Lethbridge are very much linked. We had to solve for West Lethbridge before we can solve for South Lethbridge. So this is a boundary we have to make because we're opening a new school. Dr. Robert Claxton will open in the 21-22 school year. And that was originally provided to address the growth concerns in South Lethbridge. We had Agnes Davidson. It was a growing school. It was full. We had a lot of modulars on there. And then Lake Elementary was also full. It's currently at 91%. And now we have a new growing community in Southbrook, in the southeast. And so we need to address the boundary for Dr. Robert Claxton. And because that school will draw from the Agnes Davidson area as well as the elementary school. So when we propose the change for Dr. Robert Claxton, we propose that basically if you're south of Scenic Drive or south of 24th Avenue South, your boundary would be Dr. Robert Claxton. Now, part of that change, of course, is an impact from West Lethbridge, is that we are moving the French immersion program from West Lethbridge back into a Cole Agnes Davidson, and we're making a Cole Agnes Davidson a single track French immersion program. And so that means that the English students in the Agnes Davidson area are going now being designated to Lakeview if they're on the north side of Scenic Drive, or they're going to Dr. Claxton on the south side of Scenic Drive. So what did we hear from our concerned parents about this particular change? We heard that crossing Mayor McGrath Drive is dangerous. We heard concerns of a loss of a neighborhood school. We heard loss of the dual track French immersion program in school was a concern. We also heard there's concerns of walking to Dr. Claxton from the 6 Mile area because there is no safe walking path or lights. We heard there's no parental choice because we've basically taken their choice away by the stated French immersion program only that affects English students. And then we did hear a few comments of supportive comments about the change as well. So talk a little bit about the single track French immersion program like Blythe and Davidson. We did hear a number of solutions from our concerned families that proposed that maybe we should still establish a dual track French immersion program in another location other than West Lethbridge. That was a problem having in West Lethbridge. Could we put it at Lakeview Elementary, or could we move it to the north side? Okay, sorry. Okay, and then really, you know, when we looked at, if you look at a single track French immersion program, there's no personal room in West Lethbridge to make a French immersion program. We have the most room in South Lethbridge because we're opening Dr. Robert Paxton, that's pretty much space. But when we looked at a French immersion program in West Lethbridge to begin with, it was to create space in South Lethbridge because we had no room left in South Lethbridge. And had we not moved students to Westside, we may have been looking at a single track French immersion program anyways back before we relocated that program to West Lethbridge. So, eventually we would have been having to talk about, do we do it, I mean, at that time, do we do it 2 dual track or do a single track? At that time, because there was room in West Lethbridge for that second track program. We know that access to a neighborhood school is very, very important. But a single track French immersion program has a number of other benefits. It provides, of course, efficiency, resourcing, staffing, and staffing a French immersion school is not necessarily an easy thing. And so a single track program is easy to staff. And program delivery is different. There's research that points that there's families that will support this new structure. And there's a number of these single track programs across the province. So I think a growing program like French immersion, a single track program will be worthwhile for our families. So what can we do based on some of the feedback we've heard? We know there's definitely strong concern over walking safety for those French immersion students, those English students in the Agnes Davidson area that are now going to Lakeview school boundary. There's concern about their safety. And so what we can do is we will provide transportation from that area to Lakeview School. To recognize that the English program parents had no choice because we basically taken the ability to go to your neighborhood school for the English program families. We're willing to take a look at providing a transition period to provide you with some choice. So families that are north of Sea Drive and west of Narrow Graph Drive, which are designated to Lakeview, will be allowed to transition where they can, a transition period where they can choose to attend either Lakeview School or Dr. Robert Claxton. And what we mean in a transition period, that comes with busing. So in that transition period, you'll be able to be bused to Lakeview if that's your school, the school you choose to, or you'll be bused to Dr. Robert Claxton. The transition period will be until the 22-23-24 school year, which is 3 years. And then starting the 2024-2025 school year, the school choice policy will be followed for those attending Dr. Robert Claxton, which is designated to Lakeview, and transportation will not be provided. And then, of course, we did have the concern about the safety in the sidewalk areas, because there is no direct sidewalk or lights at this time from the 6 mile area to Dr. Baxton. If you have sent a message to the city of Lethbridge to explain that that is a concern that we have with the safety, and I will be following up with them. We're at that particular matter. So South Lethbridge High School wide change, now really this does follow the comments I spoke to action up about having facility capacity in West Lethbridge, so I'm not going to go over it too much. And so on the proposed changes, what did we hear when, on the south, from the south parents about this new change with West Side students coming over? Is really, there's concerns with more students coming in. Are you going to update LCI for the additional students? And of course, we did make that boundary change as we discussed, which of the line out and it's McLeod Trail. But with regards to upgrades, we will be doing some work in LSI related to flooring and painting. But any substantial upgrades are all dependent on capital funding. So we will be prioritizing support from some of the funding we already have in LCI, and then depending on approvals in the future. We'll see when the budget's announced on Thursday. Some CMR, IMR funding, and we can, and as we have funding, upgrades that make sense. And then North Lethbridge. So North Lethbridge is the last boundary area we looked at, and you know, we've been North Lethbridge is been sitting out on its own for a little while here, and we noticed when we started to really look at North Lethbridge, the capacity ranges with our elementary schools quite vary. We have 54% to 84%, and so we want to make sure that there's equal opportunity, breadth of program opportunities amongst all our Northside schools. So the need to redraw the boundaries to provide that is important. We noticed that our communities, the boundary communities, were not connected. You can see in this example with the number 2, we've got that leapfrog with Albert and the same, the blue areas with Westminster. So we really wanted to realign the boundaries to make sense. One of the issues we have with North Lethbridge, you can see our schools are all very close together. So when you have 3 schools very close, Buchanan, Westminster, and Albert are really, really close together. It's pretty hard to draw the boundaries to be inclusive of the school communities and walk distance, and make sure that you're actually creating enough population in those schools for that breadth of programming. So that is one of the difficult challenges that we have. And of course, we have a growth area up in North Lethbridge, which is Blackpool community, and we want to make sure that we are not that growth as well. So when we made the proposed changes, we moved, we kind of made a sort of a center core area for Galbraith. We added some areas from Buchanan and Galbraith into Westminster, because Westminster was the lower population number of capacity that we needed a little more students. That's cool. And so we wanted to do some realignment there. What we heard is we changed in Park Meadows. We had taken the little square where the number 1 is, was previously Park Meadows. We moved to Galbraith, and then you can see how very close it is to Park Meadows. The concern was, hey, it's so close to Park Meadows, why are you moving us to Galbraith? There was concern over where you see the number 2s on the map, that those areas have to cross very busy roads and streets, and it's dangerous to walk. We heard some concern, well, why are you extending the Galbraith up into uplands, where it's enhanced uplands before? And then proximity close to school should be primary consideration, maintaining shortest walking distance possible, and then provide choice of schools. I have to say, out of any area of West Lethbridge, North Lethbridge has the most we call cross-boundary students attending other schools. And so we have quite a bit of Park Meadows attending Galbraith, Galbraith attending Park Meadows, Westminster, and Galbraith attending Westminster attending Galbraith, and so on. And so there's quite a bit of cross-boundary already. So what can we do? based on some of the feedback, we did make some changes to the north boundaries. We did really take to heart that little chunk where the number one is, the 18th Street and 23rd Street between 18th and 26th Avenue, and we put it back with Park Meadows. And yes, it is so very close. But again, as I explained before, our schools are all so close together in our Lethbridge that it is very difficult to accommodate that everywhere within Lethbridge. We will provide, where you see the number 2 in those areas for Westminster, we will provide busing from those areas to Westminster to make sure that there's a safety for those students getting to school. And then one of the suggestions that we had from one of the comments was, can you take a look at extending the Galbraith boundary into the uplands area? And because we were making that change, moved back into Park Meadows, we did want to move more students back into Galbraith. And so we have extended the boundary up 18th Street North to include Uplands Boulevard. So the boundary up and all the way around Uplands Boulevard. So any students that are what we call east of Uplands Boulevard, including Uplands Boulevard, and then will be Galbraith, and then everything west on Meadows. And then choice was, can you provide choice? We already provide choice with our school choice policy, and that will still be in effect for North Lethbridge schools, because our North Lethbridge schools are at this point not full. And so that is one of the main factors when we deal with school choice, as well as, of course, capacities in their classrooms, grade levels, and whatnot taken into consideration. So certainly school choice policy can be accessed for help. And I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl to talk a little bit better about school choice policy and our transition period. She can explain it better than I can.
Well, I'm going to do my best, and I know that, the whole language piece becomes difficult because you've got the term school choice and school choice policy. And then in this presentation, the term transition period is also been used. So I'm going to try to help people navigate what that means. And if I lose people in this presentation, I'm preparing, and it will go out by Friday, some communication to every parent in the city to clarify what the transition places are and how to access the school choice policy and what the procedures for that will be. But I'll try to explain my best this afternoon to provide some clarity. So as Christina said, our boundaries, if approved by the board, would take effect for the 21-22 school year. There will be strict adherence for students to attend the new established boundaries to address facility capacity and enrollment growth pressures. And as Christina has pointed out through the presentation, that varies. Strict adherence varies. So we've got some schools that are full, and where really a school choice a policy application doesn't make sense, but we've got many schools where schools may be able to, depending on class size, accommodate some school choice. So the school division will continue to follow policy 501.3.1 school choice, which allows for fair and just consideration of requests made to have students enrolled in a school outside of their attendance area. The decisions are made on criteria. So when you take a look at the policy on our website, and when I send that parent communication on Friday, it's going to have a link right to the policy, as well as the procedure and the form. You'll see that there's a list of criteria about school choice. So first of all, number one is availability of space. So is the school considered full? If the school's full, then the school choice policy doesn't apply. Then there's educational considerations, including class compositions, projected enrollment, including class size, suitability of school programs and services for students, students' priority of enrollment, which is in Regulation 4, and additional costs to the school division. So people, when is a school full? A school. A school is full when it reaches 85% capacity or beyond that, because it gets no space for growth. So in the bubble there, you see right now, Dr. Kobe Elementary School is full, Colvise Elementary School is full, and Chinook High School is full. And those schools then are defined full by the percent capacity. Does that mean they're always going to be called full? No, not if population changes, right? And so when a school is full, that's when the school choice policy does not apply. Go to the next slide again. Or proceed, sorry. That's different than a transition period. So for the majority of the changes that have been made, and for many, many parents who now students who now go to schools as their attendance boundary, the school choice policy is what applies. And there's a form that families use to request an out of attendance boundary school. That's different than transition period. And you've heard transition period in the presentation. It's a set period of time where an exception has been made to the school choice policy. In other words, the exception has been made, and as Christine has been pointed out, transportation is provided and there's an established period of time for that exception. And options have been provided to families that would include school bus transportation during the transition period. The school choice policy does not allow for transportation to a school outside the designated boundary. That's the most significant difference. So if the board approves the boundaries as presented, along with the recommended transition periods, what that will mean for those families is that they will have those transition periods with transportation for those choices that they are afforded. So transition opportunities, Christine talked about Chinook High School. So the new LCI boundary will be in effect for the following grades for new students to Chinook. So certainly one of the reasons the transition period was really important was so that students who are currently attending high school aren't moved out of that high school. But those students who are currently in Chinook High School can stay in Chinook High School and finish high school there. So it was intended then that next would be grade 9 to LCI, the following year 9, 10. Christine's talked about that. So the current grades 9 to 12 designated to attend new LCI can stay Chinook. What Christine explained, what we heard was, okay, this doesn't make sense to families because I could have one of my children going to Chinook or 2 or 3. I could have another child at 2 or 3 going to LCI, and that was very challenging for a family. And certainly that was recognized, talked about by the board when we reviewed this on February 10th. And so adding to that transition period is siblings of current Chinook High School students designated to attend an LCI boundary may choose to attend Chinook High School. However, transportation will only be provided up to and including the 23-24 school year. So the 23-24 school year, as is outlined here, all of those students that are currently in Chinook High School will be graduating. So after that year, then if you choose to put a student in that school, so for example, if you have a student in grade 8 who is designated to the LCI attendance boundary, and they have a sibling in Chinook High School, and you make the choice, no, I want to access this transition period and have my grade 8 child go to Chinook High School, that student will be provided, along with their older sibling, transportation until the 24-25 school year. So then that grade 8 student going into grade 9 and grade 12, they will no longer have transportation. And families will always have that, siblings will have that choice, but transportation is only provided for that transition period. I think that sort of tried to be fair and balanced, and of course that type of provision of transportation can't go on into perpetuity because the cost of that was affected. So that's transition. So if we go to the next slide. Like you're looking at, yeah. So you heard in Christine's presentation that there's a transition period for full EdUC that's an English program families, and that's sort of in recognition of no, hold on a minute, our neighborhood school is no longer accessible because it's a single track French immersion. And where does that family, that neighborhood, that community have some choice? And so the English programming families residing in the old Cole Agnes Davidson area, west of Marigraph, as Christine pointed out, in north of Scenic Drive, they will have the choice of attending either Lakeview Elementary or Dr. Robert Paxton Elementary School for a transition period. And during that transition period, transportation will be provided to either Lakeview Elementary School or Dr. Robert Paxton Elementary School. Keep in mind, the area that's designated for Dr. Robert Paxton Elementary School on the other side of Scenic Drive also get transportation to Dr. Robert Paxton Elementary School. In other words, that area is already of a distance that they would be transported to Dr. Robert Paxton, but in that area around that are designated for Lakeview, those families will have the choice, and they will get transportation during that choice, ending in the 23-24 school year. So that gives families lots of fair notice that if they want to have their family, their children attend Dr. Robert Paxton, they know they'll get transportation for 3 years, and that's a similar timeline to the Chinook students, for example, with siblings going in, and that they would need to make their own transportation arrangements following that, but they will certainly would continue to attend their school of choice, but the transportation would no longer be provided beginning in the 24-25 school year. So those two transition areas, the Chinook High School and the Cole Agnes Davidson English program families. So hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, I'll be sending out a letter to all families on Friday that explains all of that in detail so that they can look at, well, I live in this area, what does that mean to me? Or how do I find this form? What do I do? It'll explain all of that. So as Christine said, really these concluding remarks are similar to the introduction, and I'll turn that over to Christina.
Thank you, Christine and Cheryl. At this time, I mentioned before that we have received some public feedback with regards to boundaries. Now, this feedback was submitted for the purpose of our public forum. Typically, our public forum is at 5 o'clock, which time we've already passed. But as they have to do with boundaries, I think it's important that we include them in our conversation here prior to the motion and the vote. And so, Leanne, if I could ask you to please put up the letters. We've received, I believe it's 2 letters and a video. So what we'll do with the letters, we're not going to read the letters out loud. We'll put the letters up on the screen for about 30 to 40 seconds. I think that would be enough time. I'll have you maybe slowly scroll, Leanne, at a reasonable pace. So people watching and the trustees as well will be able to read through those letters. And then we'll play a video that was also submitted for public forum regarding that. And those boundaries?
No.
Okay, we won't do that right now. Yeah. Thank you, Leanne. We can move to the next one. Oh, Clark?
I'm not sure that people watching from home would be able to do Could they read that, Garrett? You're looking at the fee.
Yeah, they'd really have to expand it, but it'd be 50-50, I'd say.
Are you thinking the timing of it being on the screen or just being?
No, I'm looking at the feed right now, and
Yeah.
I cannot read it on the screen. So,
Oh, I see.
I don't know what, I mean, if we want people who are watching to be able to know what we're talking about, then it would have to be larger somehow, something. Or we, that's not her.
How is, Garrett made it larger. How is that on your screen, Claire?
Yeah, I'm not getting it. I'm not seeing it.
I can,
Read it.
should we read this letter? Should we redo this? Okay. We don't typically read letters for public forum, but in this case, we will make that exception. Mr. Bosch, I would like to voice my strong concerns surrounding the school division's process to rezone student catchments on the west side. The opportunity for public input seems flawed and the results does not reflect any proposal originally presented. How is the public to understand and give feedback on a proposal they never had a chance to view? As is the case with this rezoning, where the resulting plan was not seen in a proposal at any point. I believe the school division has a responsibility to provide meaningful opportunities for public review to conduct a transparent change. I do not believe the school division has accomplished this when reviewing the current rezoning. My personal concern revolves around the crossing students being sent to Nicholas Sharon, and that this was not listed as an option at any point. I feel that the crossings change is a poor idea for the following reasons. Nicholas Sharon is geographically located farther than Coalbank Elementary and Mike Mountain Horse from the crossing. The majority of students attending Nicholas Sharon would move on to Senator Joyce Fairbairn, leaving crossing students with a broken social network when they move to GS Lake. I believe this is a large reason why the Copperwood Junior High division was reverted back. So why does a crossing student not receive the same consideration? Where Country Meadows and Gary Station's designated school is the closest school, crossing students are treated, I apologize, where Country Meadows and Gary Station's designated school is the closest school, crossing students are treated differently. All three communities reside west of Métis and in close proximity to Mike Mountain Horse. Mike Mountain Horse has the capacity to accommodate a few students who reside in the crossing. Surely those few students cannot have a significant impact on enrollment and capacity concern. The crossing is a slow growth and low density community, thus resulting in a small footprint at a respected school. I am aware that not everyone can be made happy when these lines are redrawn, but the process must be at a minimum transparent. I expect the zoning of the crossing community to be put up for public review prior to the current plan being implemented. Thank you for your time, Kevin and Lindsay O'Brien. Thank you, Kevin and Lindsay, for your letter. Can that one be made a little bit bigger? Oh, I think I can do it a little bit smaller, I think. Yeah, I think I can do it. Second letter, Superintendent Gilmore. This past January, I reviewed the proposed changes to the Westside Elementary School boundaries by reviewing the Lethbridge School Division boundary review, West Lethbridge documents in fine detail. While I did not like the idea of our youngest son moving from Coalbank Elementary to the Mountain Horse Elementary, I accepted the proposed change on the basis that he would be moving schools with a significant portion of his peer group, and Mike Mountain Horse is the second closest school to our home. I did not provide feedback, as my feedback would have been neutral. I supported the change, understood that boundary changes are needed, and appreciated the difficult task ahead for the boundary review committee. This past Friday, I was extremely disappointed to learn that my community of the crossing has been zoned for Nicholas Sharon Elementary. This flies in the face of what I originally considered to be a transparent public engagement process, especially given that there was no further opportunity for public feedback. I would like to provide comments based on a review of the last version of the Lethbridge School Division Boundary Review West Lethbridge. Unfortunately, the latest version of the document has not been made publicly available. So I offer the following comments for your consideration based on the review document posted on the Lethbridge School Division website on January 18th, 2021. Please note the following. The document does not include a date or version tracking. The document following does indicate that it is a final version. The document indicates that currently Mike Mountain Horse is 80% capacity, the lowest of all elementary schools in West Lethbridge. With the proposed boundary changes, Mike Mountain Horse will be at 72%, again the lowest of all elementary schools in West Lethbridge. The document does not include any reference to the community of the crossing. The document does, however, make multiple and consistent references to the community of the piers. Please note that the piers, I apologize for my eyes, is a proposed community that has not yet broken ground for construction. No construction commencement date has been set. The community does not exist. The crossings, however, is now in phase 6 of construction. I emphasize this point as the document suggests a lack of understanding of West Lethbridge communities by the Boundary Review Committee. My concerns with the latest change to zone the crossings from Colebanks to Nicholas Sharon, as opposed to Colebanks to Rocky Mountain Horse, are as follows. The students in the crossings will be segregated from their peer group that currently exists at Colebanks. Peer group consists of students from the communities of Copperwood, the Crossing, Gary Station, and Country Meadows. The originally proposed move to Mike Mountain Horse was perfectly acceptable, as the students from the crossings would maintain at least a portion of their existing peer group. In the move to Nicholas Sharon and Crossing, students will be starting from scratch and developing a peer group at a school where peer groups are already well established. Following graduation from Nicholas Sharon, the students will then be faced with the same daunting scenario as they transition to GS50. This leaves the Crossing students with the sense that they have been singled out and treated unfairly. There are very few students in the Crossings. I would estimate there are approximately 6 elementary school students in the Crossings that currently attend Colebanks. Surely Nike Mountain Horse can accommodate these few students. Please see my comments in capacity above. In terms of future growth, please note the Crossings is the slowest growing new construction community on the west side. The latest phases are only at approximately 50% of building lots sold. According to the City of Lethbridge Land Development Department, many future planned communities are on hold until growth targets are reached in current construction communities. I apologize for that. Never mind. The economy recovers. Thank you. In other words, you will not see rapid increases in student enrollment originating from the crossings for several years to come. Our son prefers to walk, bike, or scooter to school. We certainly encourage this as it promotes healthy learning. Currently, he can access Colebanks with ease with only one major traffic artery crossing. Move up controlled intersections in a low traffic volume area. This would be the same case for attending Mike Mountain Horse, as the school is fairly accessible from our house. To attend Nicholas Sharon, however, means an unreasonable distance for his age, and he would have to cross 3 major traffic arteries, Métis, Woodruff, and McMaster, all in high traffic volume areas. So in essence, our son's option to walk, bike, or scooter to school would be stripped away. Superintendent Gilmore, I too work in the public service sector, so I reiterate my appreciation for all you do, especially in the difficult task at hand. In my role, I am involved in public consultations on a regular basis. I can tell you that the public engagement included in the boundary review process has been lacking. The aesthetics of making changes to the boundaries with no additional public consultation are indeed very poor in the public eye. I'll leave you with the following request. Zone the crossings for Mike Mountain Horse Elementary as originally planned. Alternatively, zone the crossings for Colebanks Elementary as it is currently. Know that this option may open the opportunity to save on busing service, and as I understand it, the crossing does not actually meet the distance criteria for busing to Colebanks. Respectfully, Brian Sexton. Thank you, Brian, for your submission. We also have one video submission in regards to boundaries that we'll watch now.
Hi there, my name is Kevin. I live in the Crossings. My daughter currently goes to Colebanks. I just want to give some feedback on the decision process and the resulting plan that So we were trying to be involved and be informed and watch the presentation and ask questions so we could understand the options. The issue that we're running into in our community is our students going to Nicholas Sharon was never an option given to us prior to the decision. It's difficult when you ask for public information and input when you don't give the public all of the possibilities or information you need to give you feedback. We have concerns with our kids going to Nicholas Sharon. We don't see it as the right decision. We would like the school division to go back on this part of its zoning and send our kids to Mike Mountain Horse as they initially gave us as the options. We feel that public engagement involves informing the public. This was an error made on school division. We'd just like to be rectified. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kevin, for your video submission. It was not error. We do have one more letter to look at, and so Leanne will just put that up on the screen. If I turn around, yes, I can see it. I'm just going to turn around. Dear Mr. Bosch, I am Katrina Sexton and I have a son in both elementary and middle school. After the first revision of the boundary and talking with my youngest son, he became okay with going to Mike Mountain Horse. Now again, there is another revision of the boundaries and he is now at Nicholas Sharon. We live in the crossings. Now you have taken him away from his friends in Colebanks, but at least he was going to Mike Mountain Horse with friends. But now you're moving him again to Nicholas Sharon with no friends. I'm extremely disappointed in our school division. I understand the original move, but now there is not even the option of feedback on yet again another move. You're taking one small community and seem to be moving it around like this community does not matter. I do not want my child going to Nicholas Sharon. I am okay with Mike Mountain Horse. You're taking, oh, thank you. Oh. You are taking one community away from the group of people they are familiar with. The logistics of the map do not make sense. The original proposed had high land going to Nicholas Sharon. This did not make sense. So to fix that, you take another small community and move it. Our son typically walks or bikes to school. He can continue to do that going to Mike Mountain Horse, but cannot if he attends Nicholas Sharon. He would need to cross 3 major roads. Again, I am disappointed in the change. The school division is segregating the other communities. All schools except for Colebanks have various communities. Colebanks is the only school only having the Copperwood community. If anything, it would make sense to leave crossings at Colebanks. In the crossing, there was only a handful of kids here. I look forward to hearing from you. I can be reached at, thanks, Katrina Sexton. Thank you, Katrina, for your input. Now, typically with public forum submissions, we don't respond within the board meeting, but I do believe that in this instance, because these are related to our boundaries, and we are going to put forward a motion to vote in the near future, I think it's really important that we dialogue these communications together. When I read these, the first thing I have to say is I absolutely appreciate the frustration that is being expressed. You are correct in that we faulted in the area of creating a change that was not in the original proposal, and there was not an invitation on our part to give feedback. So on that, I do apologize. I thank you for reaching out. I thank you for communicating your concern. They have been heard. They have been read, and I can appreciate how you are feeling bounced back and forth, and the reasons why you would not have engaged in conversation earlier than this point. One thing that I would like to propose as a change then, hearing this, seeing Kevin's video and reading these letters, is I would like to propose that the crossing neighborhood would have first priority for school choice within Mike Mountain Horse. What I'm hearing on top of feeling not heard over the past week, I believe it is, that they really do want to stay, they want their kids to stay with their community at Mike Mountain Forest. And I think that that would be a fair and a right response to these parents' concerns. Christine?
And I agree with you, Christine. I think that's a good solution. I just want to address, why crossing? I mean, because obviously that's one of the concerns. So when we address the concern, over Highlands, about moving them away from their current school, like Mountainhurst, and putting them back in Mountainhurst, that increased the capacity. So we talked about after we made the boundary changes, it was 72% capacity. There's quite a few in Highlands that when I put that back in, put some over 80% capacity. And so we had to take a look at one, future growth into Mike Mountainhurst, because those are growing areas. And yes, I agree. Crossings has about 20 kids at this point. We know there's some growth, and yes, is it gonna grow out significantly? It is a smaller one. True. I'm not gonna dispute the document that was presented to us. However, I can't overfill Mike Mountainhurst when it's the only school on that side of West Lethbridge. So that was our concern. So why didn't we pick Country Meadows or Gary Station to Nicholas Sharon? Well, as you can see on the map, the Crossings is the closest area to Nicholas Sharon. In looking at the concern of peer groups and whatnot, I understand, yes, they have a peer group already with the Cobanks and Country Meadows and Gary Station kids. That I also understand. When they move into Nicholas Sharon, they're not the only community in the north end of West Lethbridge that will be going to Nicholas Sharon. We also have Ridgeway that are going there. So when they move to middle school, they're not the only ones that will be going to Lakeview from the Nicholas Sharon catchment. There will also be Ridgeway that will be going, plus the small pocket in the varsity area that will be going to GS Lakeview. But we also have, of course, the school choice policy. And at West Lethbridge Middle School, school choice policy is a little easier to navigate different capacities at those schools. So there are some choices and options. But I do agree, for the time being, for certainly that they should have priority in Mike Mountainhurst, because we will have room, they won't be full yet. Our concern is getting them full, because that's the only school in North Lethbridge. So my concern is if we move too many there, then we get too full Mike Mountainhurst. And then we have no room to move because it's the only elementary school. But school choice works for the short term anyways. So we'll add that. We can add that as an amendment to the proposal then. And thank you again, parents. I know, sorry, Tyler, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I agree with what we're doing there. I like that. Give them the choice to be able to go where they need to go. So I think that will help solve some of the issues for some of the people for sure. The only thing is that going to be effective with all of our other dates that we have on there till the 23-24 school year? Because otherwise, if we say that they have a priority of school choice, that could go on forever. And if we don't get another school on the west side, we could be in big trouble when it comes to trying to do the school choice policy if it's extended for an infinite period of time. So I think we better have a date on it, and 23-24 would make the most sense based on everything else we've done. And then it can always be reviewed again at that time or whatever, but just I don't think we can put an indefinite period on this for people who live in a certain area and people choose to go where they want.
That's fair, Cheryl.
So here, it's difficulty with language again. So when we say priority in school choice, that's different than transition period. So priority in school choice means that these families that live in the crossings will have priority over all other school choice applications that go to Mike Mountainhurst. So in the event that would be in perpetuity until Mike Mountain Horse is full. When Mike Mountain Horse, so they have priority over anyone else, from other areas of West Lethbridge who are seeking to send their students to Mike Mountain Horse. So the school choice policy applies, and it's not a transition period because transportation is not provided, right? And so these parents can choose Mike Mountain Horse. Mike Mountain Horse school administration will take those crossings applications for school choice, and they will go to the top of the pile. And so we know that those will stay at the top of the pile for a few years, 3 to 6 years. It depends upon the growth of West Lethbridge, but they will be, and once a student is in a school, the school choice policy indicates that their siblings will have priority, and when it's full, no other new ones will be accepted into the school. So it does naturally provide for a cutoff point, because when a school says, we're full now, that priority for school choice doesn't apply, because although they were a priority, there is no longer school choice. Does that make sense? Not really.
No, it totally makes sense, except that you have now set up a situation where a certain location in Lethbridge now has priority till the end of time over anyone else who wants to have school choice.
And actually,
I have concerns over that 15, 20 years from now, that's set up that way. So I have some serious reservations about not having a timestamp on something like this, just because who knows what's happening a decade from now over there, and where someone else may need priority. And like I said, I think it needs to have a time. It doesn't mean that we can't extend it. It doesn't mean that when another date comes up, we can say, okay, hey, things are still kind of this way. This is how this community needs things to be. I think we should extend this date to a further date. But I do think it has to have a timeline on it.
And the other transition dates does make logical sense. Thank you. Now I'm understanding what you're saying. Clark.
Just a thought, Christine. Right now at Mike Mountain Horse, I believe there's 18 students from the crossings from Coalbanks. Now, is there room for all of those 18 to be at Mike Mountain Horse next year? Is that what I'm hearing?
We'd be pushing them at about 85% capacity.
18 would put them up to full?
We're very close to full, yeah. I mean, I can't guarantee what the enrollment's going to do during COVID. That's
Right.
using pre-COVID numbers. But it could potentially push them up there, and that's our concern of overfilling the school in West Lethbridge. So I think if we did school choice, the 18 certainly, if it was a year, probably could do it, yeah. But more than that, I can't guarantee.
So if I understand what you're saying, the other areas that are in the catchment area, the dairy station, they might have some growth over the summer that would bump these crossings people out. If there was extra growth, if there's only room for 18, and that's how many we have.
Yeah, 18, 20, 25, it's, like the numbers, I couldn't tell you exactly the number at this point.
Well,
But, yeah, but my concern is the growth.
Right.
And yeah, are we probably safe for a year? Probably, but we don't want to make a movement for 1 year.
Yeah, and if we're safe for a year with 18 students, then those 18 students will be able to go to that conference. Yeah, that's a concern that I have, that is there enough room for me to get there now? And I have to sympathize with the folks from the crossings, because when we changed in the second, from the first map to the second map, there was no feedback loop for them. And in the first feedback loop, of course, if they were okay with going to Mike Mountain Horse, there's certainly no real reason to send us feedback. Although there's a few, I mean, I read all 600 of those responses, and not very many of them said, love what you're doing. So I understand why they wouldn't provide feedback. And then the second time they get bump again, I understand where they're coming from, but
I guess my concern is if we move, that we're not allowing for future growth and only elementary school. And so I think using a priority school choice, allows them, because there might be some who are excited to go to English and Crossing. We don't know that, right? This is 3 families we've heard from. And so then if they want to go to Vancouver, they can, and others can go to Nicholas Sharon. And then, we watch with the school choice policy how we do. We have to make sure we're able to accommodate the kids that are designated that boundary, that there's room for them. I mean, one elementary school for the next, I don't know how many years, it depends. If they're school now, at least we're talking 4 or 5 years, not longer. That's my concern.
thank you.
Jan, I see your hand.
Thanks, Christine. I just been listening to some of the comments and certainly, I feel for those, the families that, are now, concerned about, their students having to go to a different school than that they initially planned. And one thing that I did get back from them was that when the initial recommendation came down that it would, all those communities would be going to coal banks, or going from coal banks to Mike Mountain Horse, they didn't object to that or contest it. They felt that that was probably the best move. But now that they're going to be splitting up those various communities, they are concerned, and I think they have certainly have a right to be concerned. So I'm all in favor of having an opportunity for them to make a choice. And as Christine has pointed out, maybe not all of them will decide to have their children going to Mike Mountain Horse. But I'm wondering about the date. What did I don't know if I missed that, or why it would be right up to, I think 20, what did you say, 20, 23, 24?
24, 25.
24, 25, okay, that makes more sense. So I'm certainly in agreement with giving the parents the opportunity to make a choice.
Well, my apologies. It's 23, 24 is the final year of the transition. Up to and including 23, 24. My apologies. Okay, thank you. Before we move on for more dialogue, if I could have somebody move the motion for our boundary changes. The amended motion. Jan.
Okay, so this motion is to change this one particular.
No, Jan, the motion is for the boundary.
Oh,
The whole boundary review.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We don't have to change that we just discussed about the change in the, we don't need a motion for that?
No, we don't.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make the motion then. I move that the boundary changes as presented be approved effective for the 2021-2022 school year.
Thank you, Jan. Well, this has certainly been a long road, and it's been a difficult and challenging process and decision. And so I think it's really important for board members to be able to voice their positions and their experiences with this. So I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to share their thoughts. Jan, as you presented the motion, I will start with you. Oh, sorry, Jan, Tyler has his hand up.
I'd just like to make a motion to extend the meeting beyond 6 o'clock, because there is no way we're gonna be done by 6 o'clock.
A new motion on the floor, the unfortunate motion of going beyond 6 o'clock. Call the question, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Okay, Jan, continue. Thanks, Tyler.
Okay, this has certainly been a lengthy process that we've had to go through, and I certainly appreciate the fact that the board was always kept apprised of the comments that we received and possible changes, information from the community as well as our schools and our principals. I think it was, although it was a lengthy process that went on for over 2 years, I feel that the decisions that we've made are for the best of all of our community. I know that some parents are not happy, and that's unfortunate. We can't please everybody, but the situation is what it is. We've got 3 schools that are at capacity, and we need to ensure that all of our students have an opportunity for the best learning experience that they can get. And it may not be in the school that the parents would like to see them in, but I think that the decisions that we've made are the best for everybody.
Thank you, Jan. Clark, do you have thoughts that you'd like to share?
I do. I have some struggles. When we put out our first map, we received feedback from the public. When we received feedback from the public, one of the things we did was we corrected some parents at Park Meadows, and we moved them to where they could walk to their neighborhood school. We took feedback from parents in the Highlands, and we said, okay, we'll put you going to Lake Mountain Horse. And so we took their feedback because they said they're very close to Lake Mountain Horse, their neighborhood school. The problem that I have is that we put out a call for public responses, and we received 600 or so. By my count, 89 of those calls were referring to the west side French Immersion situation. 110 of those emails referred to the Agnes Davidson south side English-speaking population that was going to be displaced, moving away from their neighborhood school. We also received an email that was signed by, I think, 69 families. And we received a petition, although some names on the petition were from different cities even, so, I mean, take it for what that is worth, but a petition of 200 names on a petition about moving the French Immersion. And I was not on the committees, but I don't feel, I mean, these people elected us, and I don't believe that this board has had a thorough discussion about the single track Agnes Davidson plan. And I don't think we've had a thorough discussion about moving French Immersion out of the west side for something we put into the west side 4 years ago. And I get the feeling from previous discussions that I might be alone in that. But I just wanted to voice my concerns about that, because I do not feel we have listen, if we vote today, I don't think we've done a thorough job as a board to listen to the voice of some 200 comments that we received, which is 1/3 of the comments that we received on this entire document.
Thank you, Clark. Lola,
Yes.
did you have any inputs regarding the boundaries? Or would you like to pass?
I really don't know because, you know, I mean, it sounds good in certain ways, sounds unfair in other ways. So for me to give, I can't.
That's your input. Thank you, Lola. Okay, I appreciate that. Doug?
All right, I have a few comments here. Obviously, boundary changes. This is a challenge. It's a difficult challenge. There's no question. It's not an easy task at all. The one thing we do know about Lethbridge, and particularly West Lethbridge, we have issues in terms of population growth. Of the 3% growth in all of Lethbridge, 2% of that has been reported is on the west side. So I understand what Mr. Bosch is saying, Clark is saying. We're talking about process, and I understand what you're saying, Clark, on that. I do know this, is that we have an issue with population that's not going away, and I'm sort of repeating that, but we have to deal with that. Choosing a community, a learning community, or choosing students and families to move, that is very, very difficult to do. I believe the committee for years did look at this. They did talk to a number of the administrators and teachers and things like that. I know that the population, our student and family population, is very important, and feedback is important. Trying to find a solution, someone has to move. We have to have some movement. What does that look like? I really feel for, I'm saying this, I feel for all families. The French immersion families at Nicholas Sharon, to have to move because they're a community. They're attached. I know from my experience as an administrator, when we would start first day at school in September on a Tuesday, and we were overwhelmed and we had to make new classrooms, those kids were attached that morning. And it was a very, very difficult process. And then to also look at Agnes Davidson and to move the English community there. Again, it's an attachment part. And the reason our families are so attached to their community is because our teachers, our caretakers, our assistants, and our administration do the best they can to make people feel wanted, needed, and appreciated. I don't believe there's an easy solution to this. I have talked to individual parents of the different schools, and I know that we have tried to make some changes to this, and we're not going to. And you're right, John. We're not going to answer everyone's needs. I think the school choice is an opportunity that we're trying to make this transition better. Is it great for some people? Absolutely not. I'm not sure how much more we could discuss, or maybe we've learned from this, the format of making change. I do know that this process we'll probably be looking at other boards down the road. There'll be additional population changes. We don't know where those changes are going. I mean, it's up to builders. It's up to companies that decide that they're going to build on the different areas. We can't control that. I like the fact that we've given some solutions. not all the solutions. I believe that communication is important, and particularly I have talked to the administrators at the following schools and in conversation at Plaxton and Lakeview and Agnes Davidson, and we've listened to them, and they really want to make this transition for those kids and for their staffs that are having to move. This is not easy. I know I'm repeating myself on this, but I believe we did as best as we could. Could we have done better? Sure, we learned from things like this. But at the end of the day, we have a constant, and the constant is we have population issues. And unfortunately, there are learning communities that have to move. I have confidence in our district and the people that are in charge of their children that they are going to do their best to make you feel good about being at their school and feeling needed and wanted. And that's what I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you, Doug. Donna.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm one of the trustees that have been on that boundary commission or committee since day one. So I want you to know that we have discussed and we looked at every possible scenario we could think of. And it's taken 2 years of discussions to come up to the point where we could submit to you a draft of what we thought we could do with boundaries. And then thank you, 600 people responded and we read them all. And this is a really tough decision for us. So after we hassled it, we looked at all the 600 and we made some changes. I couldn't sleep. So I got in my car and I drove the boundaries to see what we were asking children to do. Some of them are not easy boundaries for kids. I'm one of the trustees that likes French moving to the west side, to the south side to Agnes Davidson. I like that the elementary kids are going to get a strong French program. I like it, and so I'm sorry that people are feeling the need of that change, but I think it's a good one for kids, and so I like that change. I've soul searched about this because we are moving families from their community schools, and I don't like that. And at this point in time, after all the discussions and having listened to the feedback, I think that this is about the best change we can make at this time. I think there'll be changes in the near future that we'll have to look at. And I don't think these boundaries are going to be there for a lengthy period of time. But I think at this point in time that the boundaries we've got selected are the best we can do.
Thank you, Donna. Tyler.
All right, I agree with pretty much everything that has been said around here, even including Clark. Although I did not, with Clark, I did not sit on the boundary review committee. So when we had our discussions after the first round, and then the questions came in and everything else, and I know it wasn't just me, there were other trustees, but I had a real issue with a couple things, with especially Agnes Davidson, just because I'm thinking, boy, if I was an English-speaking parent who lived right by a school, and now you're telling me I can't go to that school, unless I want to take French, I don't know, it really sat hard with me. And the whole idea of should there be single track, dual track, French immersion, with Clark on that one, I'm not, I'm certainly far from the expert on that one, that's well outside my realm of ability to really have a great opinion on. But I did, when we had discussions, and I do believe we did discuss very much in regard to French immersion, because I asked questions
about, from the other people who were on the committee, and I said, okay, well, did we look at the possibility of still being able to do a dual track? Maybe we keep one here and we move one there, and then the people sat on the committee, they, I'm not saying they necessarily did, but likely they rolled their eyes and they said, yes, Tyler, we looked at that. And then I said, okay, well, what if we put French immersion on the north side? Maybe that would be good. Yes, Tyler, we looked at that too. We looked at the schools aren't big enough. We have to have a certain size of school to be able to house, because French immersion is so large. And so when we went through it and I had those concerns, I guess I felt more comfortable than Clark did that we did have the conversation, and at the end of it, it gets back to, for me, to what Doug says, we have a problem that has to be solved, and unfortunately what that means is that someone has to go across the river. People have done this depending on which committee, between 18 months to 24 months or something like that, to look at these things, and they looked at all kinds of scenarios. That's what I learned in the end after all the arrows is, yes, Tyler, yes, we did that, yes, we did that, yes, we looked at this, we've been doing this for 2 years now. It's not the first time we've heard these things. So I think there has been good discussion, and when I look back at those, and as troubled as I am with how some of these things end up for some of the people, it's just a very unfortunate situation, I think, that we don't want to make these changes. It's not like, oh, we're trying to really redesign things. It's just, we're stuck into a corner, and it's the way Lethbridge is laid out, and all the growth is over here, and the young families and kids are on the west side, and we need a west side school, but given the economy and everything else, Lord knows when that's coming. And if we do happen to get a school over, in another 4 years, we'll be jigging boundaries again. And maybe we find something, maybe in a couple years we find something doesn't work and we have to move something. You never know with these things here. So what else have I got here? I just did want to say that I also agree that I think the process went pretty well. We had very knowledgeable people. There's more to it than just where you live and everything else. There's transportation and vicinity of other schools and population growth in different areas. So I do think that we got a lot of great feedback, and I think that it brought up some very good ideas that, excuse me, even the committees and administration looked and went, well, yeah, no, that's a good idea. That makes good sense. Maybe we can do this. And we did make some changes that I think really helped a fair number of people who were disadvantaged by how this thing was going. Now, unfortunately, again, we just, the way it is, we can't make this perfect for everyone. And we're just trying to do our best to get it there. And I think that as far as the feedback loop went, we did a good job for most people. Again, this last one was a bit of a change and everything else. But even that, I think that at last minute, we hopefully, with giving some school choice priority, that will also help alleviate some of the concerns that we have there. In addition to the concerns for busing and walking and the distances and things like that. So I would just say that I want people to know that we did take these things very seriously. We know that they affect people's lives, their livelihood, their mental health, their social groups, everything that goes on here. And we don't take these situations lightly. And like Donna said, she, had trouble sleeping. I promise you, Doug had some sleepless nights. Not a doubt in my mind. Doug was walking around Heights Davidson and having some issues with things going on there. But so I think in the end, I do think it's as good of a plan as we can come up with, because for all the issues that I had and everything, they've been boiled down to, yeah, I still have some concerns about Agnes Davidson, the English families there. I have some concerns about French immersion, single track, but I do think when we had the discussion and when I asked questions and everything else, I do think that in the end, this was the best solution to the issues that we have.
Thank you very much, Tyler. Yes, I think you've all really expressed the difficulty that this process has been to get to this point. And even as we enter into the time to vote, there are still things that are difficult to move forward on. But we're trusting for good transitions, and our priority is always kids first. What is best for kids? So the motion is on the table. to approve the boundary proposal as amended. So now, following this discussion, I will call the question. All in favor of the new boundary? Opposed? Thank you. It is carried 6-1. So the new boundaries will come into effect in September of 2021. I just want to, well, first I'd like to thank the boundary committees and Christine Lee for spearheading those committees. It was 2 years of a lot of work, research, time, drawing maps, redrawing maps, listening to feedback, talking to administrators. It was an arduous job, so I thank you for your time that you put in and you will continue to put in because it's not done today. I would also like to thank, I'd like to thank the board. I'd like to thank the board for diving in and really digesting the information that came back, the feedback that came back. And I know as Donna has said, she's lost sleep. I've lost some sleep. I know Doug's lost some sleep. These haven't been easy decisions to move forward with and easy things to wrestle with. We know that our decision today is affecting the lives of kids and families, and we don't take that lightly. That is a responsibility that we hold, and we're honored to represent you in that. And so I just like to thank the board for doing your due diligence in your job in this process. And I think most importantly, I would really like to thank the parents and the community for your feedback. We do value feedback. We do value input. We do value partnership. And I know that within this process, transparency of the process has been questioned, whether it be from the timing of the boundary proposal being released to the time allotted for feedback. And I know that that is in question with some members of our community. And I do want you to know that the timing of the process and the process itself for feedback, the board does believe that this process best enabled efficiency and focus of responses. I mean, as Tyler spoke to, he came up with all these ideas and would say to the committee, well, have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? And yes, it has. So I know that the committee has done its due diligence. And so because they've done their due diligence, they were able to focus their responses to the feedback presented from the public. Families, we also know that our decision affects your families significantly. Some students will be saying goodbye to your school community, and we know that there is deep connection with those communities. And for the anxiety that this has caused and may continue to cause, we do apologize for that, and that is not our intent. Our intent is to serve the students of our community, to serve the students of our division, and as we move forward, we do believe that this is the best decision for our division as a whole. And so as we do move forward, the board, I do want to say the board will ensure that a solid transition plan is in place. We don't want our kids left and dropped. That's not what we want. We want them to be excited for their new schools. They're going to be welcomed and embraced into their new schools. And I have confidence that they're going to find incredible community in their new schools as well. And for any remaining questions that you can have, as Cheryl mentioned earlier in her presentation, by Friday of this week, there will be emailed to all parents within our division next step process. So those will include forms, policies, and just information regarding your next school. So I do want to also iterate that communication is always welcome. Please never feel that you cannot reach out to the division office. Please never feel that you can never reach out to board members or your administrators or teachers. The communication doesn't need to end here, and we welcome your comments and feedback. Thank you. Okay, so, oh, Lola. Of course.
I'm just wondering, what about, okay, this is all coming out and everything. What do we do with phone calls from various parents on the schools? Like, I mean, what is the best move to make if I do this with?
I think it's really important.
Okay, because otherwise, I want to know what to say.
Of course. I think what I find very important is it's essential to connect parents with their administrators. If it's a conversation that they can have with their administrator at their school, I do direct them to that individual. It's important that line of communication remains open. If you feel comfortable having a conversation, Lola, please go ahead. But if you don't, please direct them to myself. They can call myself or Tyler. We would love that. And yeah, and then I can direct them further. Now, if it's something that you feel is a division answer, if it's process, please have them contact Cheryl, and then she can direct them to the proper person. Doug.
I'd also like to see September, a month in, that we do a check on the families just to see how the transition is going. It's easy enough to talk about transition now and making a decision, which was difficult to vote on. But the bottom line is there's been a strong message here about feedback. And I would recommend that this is going to take time to process. I know these administrators of these that are going to be getting these kids are going to be contacting very shortly those families in some form or another and welcoming them. But at the end of the day, it's September on, and I would like to see something in place to do a follow-up to see how that is going, because that's an exciting time, and it can be a little terrifying too, right? So I've asked this board here to review that at our board meeting and have some of that information back for the first board meeting in September.
I think that's a great idea, Doug. Thank you for suggesting that. Cheryl.
And so for board members, I'll give you an email tonight just to let you know what will be happening in time. And so this Friday, communication will go out to all parents. That will give all of the highlights in terms of process. And certainly, so if you have any questions about transportation, school choice form, what are the boundaries, how do I know where, all of that will be in the communication this Friday. And if it's not in the communication, they'll have a contact that they'll be able to send any further questions if things aren't answered in that communication. And so what the process looks like, so that communication will go out. The tech team will start in the student information system now that the boundaries approved. We'll start moving students to their attendance boundary schools. That takes at least 2 weeks for that to happen. And so in 2 weeks from now, the schools will get the list of who now is in their new school attendance boundary. And so those schools like Dr. Robert Paxton or like Lakeview will begin to know who their new kids are and be able to begin making connections with those families, right? So it takes approximately 2 weeks. Director of Technology just let me know to move the students in the system so that they can look at, all right, who for next year, while keeping the students in the system for this year, what will that look like? And then, of course, we can begin to, I'll be putting out how to do the school choice form. Parents will be able to begin to do that, all right? And so it's a process, but that process should be over by March 26th. Will be the deadline for submitting school choice forms, and then families will know their answers, and of course we'll be able to plan in full. And so I'll put all of that out. And so, well, if you get questions about logistics, let people know that there'll be information coming out on Friday, and that there'll be a email that they can email, or a phone number they can phone if they have more questions.
Or come over and knock on your door.
You bet. Absolutely.
Tyler.
I like Ben's idea as well, follow up on that, it's good. The only thing I say with that is, I think we need to kind of maybe look what's going on in September and then really gauge things in October. September is chaos anyway, and if we have all these different changes with different schools and different bus routes, and I think with only 2 or 3 weeks into what's really going on there, it still may be very chaotic. So we need to look at it, see if there's any real substantial issues there, but also see how it kind of works itself out over the next 4 weeks.
The reason I said that is this board will still be in place, you know, I want to make sure that we're in place to hear what is going on. So that's why I was talking September.
Thanks, Tyler. All right. Well, now what we're going to do is we'll hop forward to our public forum. That was, I believe we have one video from Allison. So we will play that. Oh, sorry. And Allison, if you're still watching at 6:24 p.m. when you're scheduled for 5 p.m., thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm Allison from Salt Lake, and I'm here today with my son, Bradley. Today we want to talk to you guys about extracurricular activities in Lethbridge School Division. And specifically, the reason that Bradley's most interested in this is that he wanted to come and talk about esports and getting esports started again within the Lethbridge School Division. So Bradley's going to give us a little bit of a description of what esports is. I know a lot of you might be sitting there saying, what is esports? What is this? I do a lot, but Bradley knows quite a bit. He's been involved over the past couple years with esports. So Bradley, what is esports?
So it's basically just gaming and against other people from North America, and specifically the high school esports league. We play against from our high school from around
and what are some of the benefits of doing esports?
You can, from doing clubs, you can get a better GPA, and there's potential scholarships.
Excellent. And I know that through COVID time, it's been really hard to get out and stuff. So is this a virtual way for you to be able to be involved in extracurricular activities and still be able to hang out with friends?
Yes.
So that will help your mental health, help kids to still have relationships and stuff. Awesome. Thanks for all those anything else you want to no, okay. So what some of our pieces are amongst the values. The fact that extracurricular activities in Lethbridge School Division have there's no plan for how those things are going to continue within the school division. And we would like to see the school division look at future for what is going to happen with extracurricular activities. I strongly believe that the school division that looks at innovation and creativity. We just recently had the IC College event, and we heard many examples of great innovation and creativity within our school division. Some of those things are ways that we can, as our school division, continue to have extracurricular activities. There are ways that we can have extracurricular activities that are virtual. And that's our request today, is that our school division made a decision that on March 1st, 2021, that we reconvene, allowing our students in our division as long as they have staff support to be able to continue any extracurricular activities in a virtual way. So what we saw on the scholarship breakfast event, we saw, I believe it was high school, they did drama class, did a micro, a minor craft game, and they did it all virtually, where they had students on the stage for the drama activity, for the production, and then all of the students had different parts. They did it all virtually through a Minecraft setting. And when we talk about the sports, like Bradley was talking about, this is an activity that students in our division have missed out on, but we actually fully understand that there are students and student risks. But when we look, we're talking about extracurricular activities that are strictly virtual in nature. I don't see that risk is there. And I do know that that you wanted it to be very across the division. We're now almost a year into COVID, and I think that the school division, the trustees need to make some decisions around future planning. And we need to look at how do we live with COVID and what can we do that is safe for these students. How can we protect their mental health without the student well-being? We have staff support that are willing to do esports for sure, as well as lots of countries staff across the division to be looking at other extracurricular activities that students participate in. So I'm really encouraging the school division to take a look at first and foremost what virtual that on March 1st at the school division, the trustees made a decision that March 1st that across the division students can participate in extracurricular activities virtually so that we know that all students are safe. And then I would encourage the board to make a decision that by March 30th, they take a look at a complete plan for the school division. How can we start looking after the mental health and student well-being, come up with a plan of how students get back to doing extracurricular activities like virtually of this year. Parents and students want to see what's it going to look like. Can we look at doing some cohorted physical activities where we, I remember at my son was at Wilson School and they could club sports. So can we look at cohorting extracurricular sporting activities? There's so many different possibilities. I think parents and students on one hand, staff as well, are definitely wanting to see a plan of what are the stages, what are the steps that our school division is going to take. We know that eventually that students are allowed to participate in sporting activities, and obviously with the restrictions in place, we'd like to see some of those things available to students here in Lethbridge. So looking for that plan. First step is that on March 1st, students should be allowed to participate in virtual extracurricular activities. And second thing is that on March 30th, at parents, students, and staff, see a plan in place that stages how we're going to get to those different stages for extracurricular activities. And absolute full respect for the school division for what's occurred in the past year. Definitely lots of risks, but the school division made sure that we kept our students safe. And now we need to look at this next step and those next pieces. Staff, they're absolutely an important piece of this. And there's many staff that are willing and able to help out. And I don't want us to be extra on any staff, but there are staff that are willing to move forward. And in talking to some staff, I heard that staff has said if we take care of the well-being of these students, we're going to see happier students in class. The success in the class is by providing for well-rounded students. So I encourage the board, if there is any trustee that would like to make a motion today, that would be great to see the board make this next steps that we can have virtual activities that are completely safe for our students to participate in. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Allison and Bradley, for your submission, and on behalf of the board, I would like to thank you for your presentation. Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Leanne. Allison and Bradley, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. We appreciate public members coming forward to express concern or perspective. And Bradley, I love seeing students advocating for themselves and using their voices. So thank you for joining your mom in that video presentation. You can be assured that the board will carefully consider what you have said today and provide a response in the near future. The response will be included within next month's board agenda. Thank you. All right. Well, now we get to, Lola, is your hand up?
Yeah. And I'm sure there's more than one of our hands up. I found that very I found it so chalky, and it was hard, difficult to figure out what was wanted and what, unless I'm losing it. And I'm sure some of you others might be losing it too, because I didn't quite understand. I know it's all about students and stuff like this, but, you know, I want some clarification. I'm gonna hold on to my new clarification.
We're not voting on anything.
Okay, good.
No. Allison and Bradley brought forward a motion, or brought forward a presentation. When public brings information to a forum, we do not give feedback at the forum. We'll give feedback by the end of the month, but by the next board meeting. So Allison has asked for a motion, but that's not what we do within the public forum.
Because I've never seen it.
No, so that's not proper process, so we won't do that. But I can fill you in after the meeting as to what they were talking about, because it was hard to hear. Donna. Thank you,
And you will let us know how you respond, right?
Oh, of course, absolutely.
Because I agree with Lola, that was hard to follow, and it could be the mechanics of producing one of those studies, but that was very hard to follow. And so I'm suggesting if somebody in the future wants to make presentations, maybe they do it in writing as well. No, because it was, I got the gist of what she was saying, but there were dates and particular steps were very hard to follow.
Yeah. Garrett, is there?
I can send the video to you as well, so you can look at it at home as well. So
yeah. And are the videos, Garrett, are the videos included in
the live stream? Yes.
The live stream online? So if you go back, if you go to the board webpage and you can access archived board meetings, you might be able to go to this time and read and see it, hear it better on your computer. Yeah, thank you. Okay, number 6, division highlights. We're gonna fly through the rest of our, we will fly through the rest of our agenda. It's very late right now. Donna, you had your hand up.
Okay, so division highlights for me is going to parent councils online. I love that. We're getting more people come and talking about things that are important to them. I love parent councils online, so that's division highlight. And then another one for me was town hall. I loved all of the comments about wellness. So I've been on the wellness committee now. It's for 2 terms, so I did chair it or I'm on the committee. And I know it's such a pandemic that have heightened our awareness about health and ethics. But I also want to give a shout out to Mariah. So we had the wellness, we had Healthy Schools Committee when Mariah came to our division, and it was mostly looking at nutrition and trying to get some sugar out of our school system. But Mariah has led us in a more fuller understanding of wellness and this. We changed our name from Healthy Schools to Wellness Committee, and she's gotten us to look at all the sides of wellness. So social, intellectual wellness, physical wellness, spiritual wellness, emotional wellness. So I think that the division was well set up to have that COVID concern fall on what we knew about wellness. So I thank you, Mariah.
Thank you. Anyone else with highlights? Clark?
We can't forget the ICE scholarship recognition. I thought that was very, very positive. And I agree that the virtual school councils, I've seen more parents than I saw when I went in person. And and of course the town hall, I found that the town hall was great. I only had about 6 or 7 minutes in each room. And I really kind of felt bad when I left, but you have to leave kind of get around everybody, but some really good conversation.
Thanks, Clark. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree with Clark and Don about the town hall. I mean, it was short. It was nice to get around, but what I love about the town hall is just the blunt honesty with the students. They're great. I mean, they didn't really need filters, but they just say it as it is, and we're all sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, that is so true," or "That's a great perspective," because as a 60-plus person, I don't always get it, right? The other thing is our Indigenous community learning committee is we have another student there. I'm going to shout out to Keegan from Chinook. Again, there was another fellow that I'm so impressed with his perspective, and he really gets us thinking. I don't always agree with it, but it's great. So when I see this is what really excites me about education, and what we're seeing is our kids really have a perspective, and they're coming from a real good place. And for me, that's a highlight for sure every time.
Great, thank you, Doug. Anyone else? I know the ICE online events was great. Daniel Lewis was a great speaker. He was really incredible, and I received some positive feedback from some of our guests. And I also had the opportunity to go to a grade 6 class and talk about municipal governance. So that was lovely and fun. It was good. It was fun to be in a class again, so I enjoyed that. All right, board chair report. I have nothing to report, so we'll move on to the associate superintendent report. Seeing business affairs.
Okay, I'll be really brief, because my report's there. I just want to highlight a couple items. Just want to highlight that on February 10th, the province announced the critical worker benefit. It's a one-time payment of $1,200 to school-based staff, and this was directed mainly for those staff that work one-on-one with students in the classroom, secretarial staff, custodians, and of course, school bus drivers. We have about approximately 450 of our employees, that doesn't include school bus drivers, that will be receiving that payment in March. Provincial budget is on February 25th, this Thursday. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, it's okay, but not sure. Transportation, we just finished another round of transition with our new provider. Like any transition date, it's kind of like starting the first day of school. The first day there was a few hiccups yesterday. New drivers having to do busing and seating charts, so things routes were late, but today things are back on track. And so we just have a few more routes yet. We'll be transitioning in March, and then we'll be almost fully transitioned with Southland. And then travel insurance, I just want to update you. Finally, after a year, we received in the bank on Friday our check from insurance for cancellation of travel school trips due to COVID. We had about $42,000 we were claiming back from insurance. Between the pretty much like WestJet travel vouchers that were provided and the travel insurance, we were able to offer 100% reimbursement to our families, which is not something that is actually available under most insurance. So we're pretty pleased with that. And so checks will be going out right away for that. ICE scholarship, everybody's talked about that, but we did raise $10,700, so I was pretty excited about that. Unless there's any questions on my report, that's yes,
It's exciting that the school is ready for occupancy in March.
Yes.
And you keep telling us that we get to see it sometime.
Yes, I'm actually hope. Well, I just like to keep building the anticipation part. I will see, maybe we can arrange something, for a meeting day, maybe next, in March. Yeah, we just wanted to make sure I'm actually waiting for when to make the report, but it may not be done. It may not be done in March, but, I can get you in because it will be in March when we get.
Because when it's occupancy, we don't have to work hard enough.
No, you can come in, it'll still be dusty and dirty and whatever,
Okay,
but,
that's okay, I walk my dog around all the time.
yeah, I'm very excited to show you. It's a beautiful school and we're pretty excited about it. So, yeah, the one piece that, the solar wall, I don't know if it'll be done or not, but that's okay, we'll show you that. I'll see what I can do tomorrow. Any further questions from Rti? All right, human resources, Mike.
Yeah, and I'll also be brief. As you probably saw in terms of hiring, we did hire a vice principal for Dr. Robert Claxton, so that was really exciting. Now that we have the team there. In terms of highlights, probably just wanted to call your attention to the pivot point update. So we certainly saw this last pivot point, the other pivot point, a trend of more students moving back to in-person learning as opposed to moving to at-home learning. So around 70 to 75% moving back to in-person. We did end up collapsing 4 of our online classes, and that was just due to small enrollment. So basically what happened was we were able to redistribute those students to other online teachers in the same grade, and then of course we had to move some of the teachers back into in-person classes to support the kids that are coming into in-person. So certainly some disruption for some of our learners, but we certainly tried to minimize that as well and find a balance between not running classes that were so small that they just weren't very effective, but also not disrupting a whole pile of students. And I just want to say a huge thank you to our elementary school principals in particular, all of our principals actually, because they all managed a number of changes at pivot points and really just did a fantastic job. But particularly at the elementary level, there was some extra complexities because there was often one teacher was serving students from multiple schools, so it really required the principals to work together to make sure that none of the kids slipped through the cracks, and they just did a phenomenal job. We made some central decisions and then basically said, okay, we need you to take care of it, and they just took care of it, so awesome job as well.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions for Mike? Seeing none more, instructional services.
And just for the sake of brevity, I'll just draw your attention to the Curriculum Resource Center data that I'm sure you probably have already reviewed. And, we have so many different departments under instruction, and we have not really ever highlighted or shared with the board the work we do downstairs. So when you get a chance, please do have a look at that data, and we will be talking about it a little bit at the board retreat because we are sharing it in that report as well. So it's great information for you all to have as we look at perhaps using more online resources than the old traditional take and makes that we used to have. So just good conversation for you all to think about. And yeah, my report's just there for your perusal. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Maureen. Did anybody have any questions for Maureen? Seeing none, we will move on to superintendent report. Cheryl.
And the board party report is in the agenda for your information. Certainly a lot of highlights have been talked about already with respect to moving forward, and we'll be into full swing of reviewing the board plan priorities and taking a look at next year when we do our March board strategic planning. So any questions about the board priority report? Acknowledgement of excellence. I absolutely love the way we're doing our acknowledgement of excellence this year because we are getting a deeper look into each, 2 or 3 schools each month as we go into them. So thank you to Churchill High School, Senator George Fairbairn. I loved the focus at Churchill on a lot of showcasing service and service to community and celebration of other people. So certainly, I think represents that sense of community in the school. And lots of acknowledgement of things that are kind of really cool and innovative at Fairbairn. So it's interesting how the color of the school, the nature of the school comes through. And so I'm really enjoying the acknowledgement of excellence this year. And so certainly when you see those back, those students or know them, giving them some personal acknowledgement is wonderful. Donations and support. Remember, we had one, yes, we did have one. We had Panabo Pizza, and where they teamed up with the Aggie Davidson to raise $1,000 over 2 nights. So that's great for virtual scientists in school program. That's been a strong program at that school for a long time. And then we've got, if I keep going, our calendar of events is there. If you see anything missing, if you want to let us know now, or if you can let Leanne know otherwise, so that we don't miss anything important upcoming.
And the only thing is on the 9th and 10th, we have the CMHA conference for King and Mental Health. That would be the only thing.
It's the 9th and 10th. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Cheryl. Right now, on to reports. Indigenous Education Committee.
Again, brevity. Just want you can read over the minutes there. Just a couple highlights. So, John Chiefcap showed 2 videos, which I felt very, they were very enlightening. One's called Deconstructing White Privilege, and the other one was called Creating Environments for Indigenous Youth to Live and Succeed. And it was about the challenges of our Indigenous students and their families. And it also talked about racism. And it was a really good topic for us to kind of look at for the first time. And it really was thought-provoking. And there was also, John shared some reflections, his personal experiences growing up in our public system and how that was being related to contemporary versus the old man Blackfoot. So we're making a lot of progress on that, and I think the big thing that we're coming out of there is with the pandemic, it's a real challenge to engage our Indigenous families, and we're going to review the strategic plan about what we're doing, and I know Morag and John and her committee have been doing a wonderful job implementing things, but again, our next meeting will be in May, but we're making progress on that in light of how difficult it is to move in a direction when we're doing the virtual all the time like that. Anyways, if you have any questions, please direct them to myself or John.
Thank you, Doug. Any questions for Doug? All right, Clark. ATA, local council.
Well, the ATA, we talked a great deal about the convention. Sorry. We talked a great deal about the convention, but I knew that was going to be over before it started. So, we all were invited to the convention to follow through on that. We talked about online learning. The gist of the conversation was that I believe the ATA feels that we need to make sure we're hearing everything about online education, including the negatives. Quite concerned about the weaponization of exams and success on coursework when there's no exams in place for kids that are at home and kids that are at school, and starting to equate the level of education as being very good in both ways, and we'll have to have that conversation. Very happy with their personal day carryovers, and the teacher induction plans are in the works. I don't, the date for that, what's the date for that? Anyhow, they're going to, at this time, they were going to stagger teacher induction. So it would be in person, but staggered, so we wouldn't have a lot of people all at once. So I don't know what that looks like from our standpoint or the district standpoint. And they mentioned that 3 boards of the 61 boards were still bargaining last year's conference.
All right, thanks, Clark. Any questions for Clark? Okay, Policy Advisory Committee. Any good? We're good, Lola? Oh, we're good. We saw the policies on the stuff.
Yeah. So, and I wasn't there, I wasn't at the policy meeting, but they did a good job on whatever they were doing, so.
Thank you, Lola. And final report is the scholarship reference. Jan.
You got my report there on the our scholarship virtual event. It was our 5th anniversary of our ICE scholarship, and our first, and I hope our last virtual event. Although it was, I thought, very successful, and Christine did a fabulous job in starting it off and ending it, and we had Chinook High School singing "O Canada." We went through the same old thing, and it was really good. And I understand from Christine Lee that we raised $10,700, so that was great. And thanks, Christine, for working your contacts there. And apparently she sent a thank you note to all the sponsors and enclosed a sample of tea by Daniel. So I hope all the board members got a chance to watch it. It was really, really good. And Daniel Lewis was just an excellent speaker. He was really, really good. I think one of the best that we had. So it was very good.
Thank you, Jan. Any questions for Jan? All right, so we have 2 correspondence sent, one to the city of Lethbridge regarding the harm reduction sites, which is no longer valid as they've pulled back the request for that site, and a letter to Minister LaGrange regarding concerns with top funding. So they're there for reading in minutes. And this concludes our regular board meeting. It is adjourned. Thank you for your time today.